Hello, welcome back if you've been here before. If not, hi, my name is David. I make videos talking about stories that I like to talk about. This is the first installation of the series that I talked about in the last introduction video that I put out, of what I'm now calling, for now, a book that changed me. This is the first video of that, and I will be talking about the book Please Look After Mom by Kyung-Sook Shin, translated by Chi-Young Kim. And I there's annotations in it. Most of these I'm not going to much talk about. These are just for me, honestly. I also did have a notebook where I wrote stuff down in it. These are stickers. They're somewhat thematic, and at the end I'll share why these are thematic. But yeah, honestly, I'm not going to touch this at all because this is kind of a fragile notebook. But I wrote everything down, whatever. But this was mostly for me to familiarize myself even better with the story in of itself. And so this video is going to be, I don't know how long it's going to be, but it's going to be a big one. And I'm really excited for it. And it's just going to be me talking about this book and the things that it does and why it's so good and why it's so interesting, etc., etc. I count this as I might talk about this later, but I count this as my third favorite book of the books that I read in high school that were not set in the United States of America. This one is an amazing book, and I appreciate it a lot more now than I did before. And so I'm so happy that I'm able to share this book with you all. Before I begin, I do want to say, please, 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 read this book, buy this book, support the author. I love this book, and this video does not replace reading this book and having consumed this book. And so I want you to like hear the first parts of this video, why I like this book and stuff like that. Before I get into the plot and stuff, buy the book, read the book, come back, and then fan out with me because this is a really good book. I'm gonna remove the jacket so that it's not annoying. So in this video, I will first begin with sort of my background with this book and, how I started reading it and like other sort of aspects around that. And I'll also be briefly diving into the author herself, Kyung-Sook Shin, and the translator, Chi-Young Kim, because I feel like any sort of analysis of any sort of story is not complete unless you look at the author and the circumstances around when they wrote the book. Because, yeah, a book can be taken in its entirety as in a vacuum, but a lot of things are affecting it when it's being written. And so I wanted to dive into that as well. And then I'll go into the story, the plot of the book, and the things that it does interesting. Obviously, I'll give a little bit more detail about that. So yeah, let's get into it. This is the synopsis given by the book. A million plus copy bestseller in Korea, a magnificent English language debut poised to become an international sensation. This is a stunning, deeply moving story of a family's search for their mother, who goes missing one afternoon amid the crowds of the Seoul Station subway. Told through the piercing voices and urgent perspectives of a daughter, son, husband, and mother, Please Look After Mom is at once an authentic picture of contemporary life in Korea and a universal story of family love. You will never think of your mother the same way again after you read this book, which I agree with. In the jacket, there is a quote by Geraldine Brooks, author of March. I'm not familiar with that. She says, Here's a wonderful original new voice, by turns plaintive and piquant. Please Look After Mom takes us on a dual journey to the unfamiliar corners of a foreign culture and into the shadowy recesses of the heart. In spare, exquisite prose, Shin penetrates the very essence of what it means to be a family and a human being. So this book I read around sophomore year of high school, I think. I don't really remember reading it, just like the moments of it, like holding the book. And I do remember that I got it through the local library. Um, it was not this cover. I bought this book from this copy from Thrift Books, and I swear I cannot find the cover version that I got when I was in high school when I was reading it. I can't find it online, It might have been discontinued, but I would think that it'd still have some record of it, and I swear to God, it's not the same one, but whatever. This one I got from Thrift Books, really good condition. I'm not sponsored by Thrift Books. I should be, but I'm not. Anyways, I remember when I was reading it, this was the first time that I can remember reading a novel with a second person point of view. And since then, the more I've read, the more second person POVs I've experienced, but it doesn't change the fact that reading it for the first time felt so new, so daring, so amazing to be able to read, because I was reading books that was in first person, and then I get the first page of this book, and it's like speaking to me, and I'm like, hello? It was so good. It changed how I was able to perceive writing and reading and stories, and began to open my eyes to how stories can be written differently and in different ways. And it sounds juvenile, but it's true. This was something that I've never really encountered before in high school, and it was earth shaking to me. And obviously, there's so many other stories that I've experienced since then, and looking back at my emotion now seems pretty unexperienced, but it was truly amazing. I've kept the book in the back of my mind ever since. When I went through high school and then through college and many other events in my life, I still thought about the feeling this book gave me, the emotion about writing, if not exactly what happens. I remember some small snippets and moments in the book itself, but it was mostly just how I felt about reading it that I held on to. It wasn't until recently that I wanted to talk about the other two books in this series, but I wanted to revisit it, and so I went to Thrift Books and I got the copy and I read it for this video, obviously. And because it was such a long time ago, I felt like I was reading it for the first time. Sure, here and there were moments that I remembered, but the vast majority of the book was new to me. I knew there were different POVs. I remembered that, obviously. I knew that the daughter was in second person, son was in third person. I knew there was also a first or maybe another third person POV, but I just didn't really remember those. But I do remember the whiplash of me at 17 adjusting to the second person POV and then returning again to the third person POV, which I'm more used to, or I was more used to, and it was just jarring, the transition, and it was not a bad jarring moment. Let's just remember that. So it meant something to me to have that sort of emotion, and rereading it again, I did feel it again. It was a shift, an abrupt and sudden difference between aspects of the same story that felt disorienting, but like in a really good way. And I have to be honest, if I read this book for the first time today at my age right now, uh, and not in the past, it would not have impacted me as much as it did back then. I have some issues with it. I don't really want to touch on them. It's just mainly the lack of focus on like other members of the family, as well as like lack of focus overall. But like, I don't. We're not gonna touch on that at all. I don't want to linger on the criticisms I have, and I want to focus on the good aspects of this book in and of itself. It's still one of my favorite books, and like just because it's not as good as I remember it does not mean it's not still amazing. This book is separated into 5 sections. There's 4 main sections and an epilogue. It's in the point of views of the daughter, the son, the father, and the mother, as the jacket said. But they change in their POVs. It's second person for the daughter, third person for the son, back to second person for the father, and then first person for the mother. And so, and then the epilogue itself is back to the daughter again in second person. So, what I want to focus in this video is just going through the book and showing how the point of view changes influence the story, why it does this, what does the changes in POV do overall in any kind of story, and why this book is so amazing. Before I begin diving into the story, any good analysis of a story should be taken with the context of who wrote it. I am not a member of the nationality and ethnicity featured in this book. Thus, I will not fully understand the complexities of their culture and their society, but by doing this research regarding the author, I hope to find an approximate point of view to be able to discuss this book and the techniques featured that will honor the authors and their work within my different point of view. Kyung-Sook Shin has written 7 novels and has been featured in multiple short story and flash fiction collections. In an interview with The Guardian, which I will link in the description below, Shin spoke with Maya Yagi about her books and grew up in Korea. Regarding the book, Please Look After Mom won the Man Asian Literary Prize in 2012 and was part of South Korea's Korean Wave, or Hallyu, which was a demand for Korean popular culture that led to the rise of the world stage. Think K-pop, Psy, Squid Games. This book, Shin says, is in response to South Korea's rapid growth after the Korean War in 1950 through 1953, which, quote, opened up social chasms not only between countryside and city, but between generations, end quote. Shin spoke in an interview about the emotion that follows such upheaval. Quote, people have lost something important they took for granted, and that loss leaves them devastated. Any interviews or articles that I mention or draw from will be linked in the description. I would suggest reading the interview as it goes more in depth into Shin and her life growing up. The interview was published in 2014, and so in the interview, she was 50 years old, so she's about 60 years old this year. Shin grew up in Changup, which is a location in the book itself, South Korea, in Southwest Korea, where she planted and harvested with her family and her farm. She ties her childhood of farming for her distinct point of view. Quote, I wouldn't be able to describe true beauty or feel the good within people. Regarding her mother, she says, I realized reading was a way to make my mother happy. I am what I am because of her. But I never thought, what were her dreams? End quote. Shin has lived through a lot of socio-political and cultural shifts within South Korea, which has led her to writing other books, such as I'll Be Right There and The Place Where the Harmonium Was. And as part of Hallyu, Shin has been an important aspect of Korean popular culture. When asked why Hallyu came to be, she said, quote, today you can put yourself before society. In the past, individuals were required to sacrifice so much. It's important to escape from that, especially in art. My generation was not free. Creating democracy came before anything else. But the youth today have more imaginative freedom. We have no choice but to start over again like a child learning to walk, practicing how to live as an individual and as a country. I couldn't find much on the translator, Chi Young Kim, but I did find several interviews. Both I linked in the description as well. Kim's translated many Korean books and was part of the Man Asian Literary Prize in 2012. In her interviews with Korean Literature in Translation website, uh, Kim points to her mother for the reason she began to translate novels, as she was also a translator. Quote, my mom has been translating my entire life, so I grew up with stacks of paper all around. She also states her goal for translation, which is, quote, to make it as smooth and, trying to trick people into thinking that it's not a translation. In a different Korean literature interview, she says she wants to invoke the emotions you experience as a Korean reader through the English language. Quote, I always try to capture the author's tone. That's the hardest, most elusive thing to get. Some are easier than others, especially if the author's tone matches my own. In an interview with The Chosen, she says she enjoys translating Korean literature, choosing which book she wants to work on. Quote, I often get excited whenever I encounter a uniquely Korean word or expression, as if I'm going on an adventure. What makes my heart race is to be able to translate something that is seemingly impossible to translate. Both women bring their own distinct histories with them into this book. Kyung-Sook Shin writes this story from her heart, her past, and what she feels she lost in the changes in her country, and how that affects her and other people around her. Chi Young Kim brings a goal to honor Shin's writing by translating it in a way that makes us English readers feel the sadness and joy that Shin created for her Korean audience. And I think they both succeeded in what they wanted to do. So now I'm going to get into the story. Like I mentioned prior, there are 5 sections to this book. I'll try my best to summarize about 200 pages worth of history and drama into a concise manner while also analyzing the effects of the point of view in the story and the elements that I enjoy of the story in of itself. The story takes place only within a few months, but it does touch upon many years prior, cherry picking small moments from the past, and thus it gives a sort of incomplete yet very illuminating view of the family that we are diving into. In terms of point of view, we begin with the elder daughter. She's the third child of the family, named Chi-han, in second person point of view. And then we move to Hyong-chol, the elder, number one child, or the first child born, that's it, in third person POV. And then we go back to second person POV with the father, who is not named, so I'm just calling him father. And then back to first person with the mother, mom. Please look after mom, titular mom. The first person has some elements of second person in there, but it's mostly focused on first person POV. And then finally, in the epilogue, we're back in Shihan's point of view, second person point of view again. Usually, books tend to stay within one point of view, sometimes changing focus character, but it sticks to the same perspective, right? Some stories do change in POV perspective, and they do it for like a reason. For example, The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak has first person as Death speaks, and then third person as he's narrating Liesel's story. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid is entirely in first person POV and has a section, a very small section, like 3-4 pages in second person. Percy Jackson, the first 5 books is entirely in first person, but once more people come in for the second series, it becomes third person limited, stuck to one singular person each chapter, just to be able to encompass so many characters. But then again, that only is a change between series. But between chapters, not many stories do what Please Look After Mom is doing. The first section is called Nobody Knows, and is, like I said, in the second person point of view of Yu Shin Han, whom I count as the main protagonist of the entire book, despite its alternating viewpoints. When I do a direct quote to a direct line, I'll show the picture of it so that you know that I'm directly quoting from the story. From the beginning, we are told it's been 1 week since mom went missing, which immediately sets up the conflict and creates this closeness and intimacy between us, the audience, and Chihan's mother. She's not Sonyo, as she's, her name is Sonyo. She's not referred to as that. She's not referred to as her mother here. She's mom, which makes the audience see her as our mom. Throughout this entire section, we are in the point of view of Chihan, but it's only in second person point of view. So we don't learn her name is Chihan until the next section. By the way, she was discussing with her siblings on how to find their mother, Park Sonyo, and is making a missing persons poster. This first page drives straight into the second person POV with your elder brother and all you can see is, or all you can do is, etc., which does honestly take a bit to get like used to if you're not used to it, but eventually you can start reading it like any other story and you start getting the feel of it. Second person POVs are not very common, but there are there if you search for them. A lot of the time, readers will interpret second person point of views as the narrator speaking to the audience member, but I don't believe that's the intent of most authors who do write in second person. In terms of an author directly speaking to the audience, you commonly see this sort of text addressing the reader directly in like nonfiction or advertisements, like saying like you can get this in 3 payments of $19.99 or something, whatever, like that. And it is present within narrative fiction, but it tends to be in like smaller moments that don't really affect the story in any significant way. And it's usually mixed in with first person POVs as well. For example, The Great Eastern by Howard A. Rodman has sections where the character is speaking to an unknown reader who will eventually read the notebooks that the character's writing in, sort of pleading them to like, don't judge me too harshly or whatever, but it's not speaking to any specific character, it's literally speaking to an audience without really know who the audience is. The majority of the time, I found at least, that many of the second person POVs are speaking to a specific character. So, for example, Chi-han and later her father are speaking to themselves. Harrow in Harrow the Ninth by Tenzin Mir is speaking to, well, actually, I think it's technically Gideon speaking to Harrow, but whatever. Carmen herself in The Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. Yes, the author is addressing the reader, but they're speaking to a character or to themselves. The reason for the second person POV changes depending on what the author wants to accomplish. When Shihan narrates her family's panic after losing mom, the second person POV causes the reader to experience her actions in a more intense and intimate way than if there was a narrative distance between us and Shihan, while also creating a dissonance within herself. As Shihan narrates, it's as if she's speaking to herself, which is creating a distance from herself and the actions that she does, as it may feel too difficult to talk or think about those actions. This treatment also happens with her father later in the story as well. As the story goes on, we begin to learn a handful of things that are important to the story and the family. They begin to argue about mom's birthday as their father, like I said, unnamed, so just father, capitalized. Father says the birthday that they put on that they know is different from official documentation. Mom and father were celebrating to celebrate their birthdays. As throughout the years, they've begun to meld the birthdays together to streamline those celebrations because their birthdays land pretty close to each other. Mom had been the one to suggest this in the first place. But after a while, they simply begin to bypass mom's birthday in favor of father's. They start arguing about it, and it's kind of it's a very small moment that's like really nothing, but it does illuminate a lot of how they think of their worlds in a way. Because so like Chihan's writing the missing poster, and she doesn't know if she's right she should write 1938 or 1936, uh and they say it should be the one that's the official date, and then some other people argue it should be her like actual birthday despite it being incorrectly in documents. And so it's sort of like this conflict there of like what's true to mom and what's true to the world that they have to grapple with. As they're putting together this missing poster, they realize they don't have a recent picture of mom and use one taken from father's 70th birthday, which was 3 or 4 years ago. When they start talking about mom's birthday being bypassed in favor of father's, it's pretty detached emotionally when she talks about it. Throughout the story, we will get moments of the characters, whether deliberately or not, in my opinion, dehumanizing or simply not caring about mom. And the second person POV here makes Chihan's actions feel like our own actions, and we can feel that guilt about these moments. It's reducing that narrative distance that we would normally have with like a third person or first person POV much closer. I mean, narrative distance in first person is already pretty close, but making it second person, it makes this like the distance is so short between us and the story. This section also briefly introduces the rest of the family, only naming Hyong-chol, the elder child, and showing them being 5 siblings total, some with children of their own. Hyong-chol tells Shihan to write something on a poster. He tells you to think of a better sentence to tug on the reader's heartstrings. Confused, she just writes something, and at every sort of like opinion from anyone else, she corrects it. And every line she writes and every correction she makes doesn't please Hyung-chol or any of the family. And throughout the story, there will be moments that illustrate how this family treats each other in the aftermath of losing mom. And these moments sort of stick out to me in terms of just, I wouldn't say casual cruelty, but just unkindness that occurs unchecked in a way. There's also moments of incredible kindness and incredible care that contrast these moments of argument and stuff. So I'll point them out when I want to because I like them. At one point, when they're making this missing poster, they begin to argue, throwing accusations as to who to blame for losing mom. We learned Chihan hadn't learned about mom's disappearance until 4 days after she officially disappeared. She begins to think about the moment mom got lost and where she herself was, as Chihan is sort of looking around Seoul Station, trying to imagine the moment that mom got lost. Here, an important moment that I want to highlight happens. People shove past you as you stand on the platform where mom was wrenched from father's grasp. This is an internal thought that passes through Chihan, written in the second person POV, that shows this narration is not omniscient and is solely within Chihan's perspective, and reflects upon something in the future of the book that I will come back to, so keep this in mind. Chihan's guilt begins to grow as she thinks of where she was when mom went missing. Chihan is a novelist and was visiting the Beijing Book Fair in China. In this scene, we flip back and forth between Chihan's actions in China to her perceived actions of mom and father in Seoul Station. You were flipping through a Chinese translation of your book at a booth when your mom got lost in Seoul Station. This guilt she feels, comparing her enjoyable time in China, delivered with yous and yours, feels so sad and feels like she's berating herself. We get a brief mention of people telling the family that they saw mom walking slowly or sitting or standing vacantly in the station before she left. The clues and the search for mom is an important aspect that I'll also highlight. The story moves around to different locations and different periods of time following the characters' thoughts of the past. In the family meeting, Chihan's sister in law questions how she got lost with so many signs, insisting that something had to have happened to her, which Chihan pushes back against. They beat around the bush, not wanting to mention her age and her growing debilitation because of it, just mentioning how mom was just like that these days. After this, the story begins to split into different times, and it's preceded with a thought from Chihan. When was it you realized that mom didn't know how to read? This line hits like a rock. It's punchy. It feels like an accusation. If it wasn't in second person, it would feel sort of contemplative, internal, just moving from one thought to the other. When did she think? When was it that she first realized mom could not read? But no, with the mention of science and soul and how mom was like these days, it feels like Chihan is floored by this thought, forgetting that she knew that mom is illiterate. When was it that you realized that? When did you forget it? And since the audience is so narrative close to Chihan, it feels like she's accusing us. When did we forget it? We begin to dive into some of their past as Chihan remembers the letters that Hyong-chol wrote to and sent to mom while he was in Seoul for school, and she remembers writing her first letter when mom wanted to respond. Mom would have Shihan as a child read Hyung-chol's letters out loud, and she thought it was mom teaching her how to read, but in reality, she realized later that mom couldn't read any of his letters, and no one really knew that. It's also sort of described how mom treated Hyung-chol differently, somewhat favorably, than the other children, simply as the eldest. Shihan never got any letters from her when she moved away, and she sort of thinks about, like, why not? And it may have been because mom simply could not write or read any of the letters. And then their village put in a cell phone, so they didn't have to like worry about that. I also neglected to mention some like basic areas. They obviously the majority of the story takes place in Seoul, in South Korea. Mom and father's house is in Cheongup, and any other locations I'll try to remember to put them on. But in regards to the locations visited in this story, we'll come back to that. Shihan begins to realize that she never really knew her mom. This calls back to the chapter title, obviously, Nobody Knows, which seems to allude to the idea that mom lived a very private life, or at least a life that no one really cared about. And it was not by choice. An important moment between Chihan and mom that we will return to again and again will be Chihan's visit last fall, when she visited and realized that she never really knew mom. They never really had a relationship before. There was a quote that I actually forgot to write down. Page 17, either a mother or and daughter know each other very well or they're strangers. And I think that's very, very poignant in regards to looking at their relationship. Jian only ever called her mother mom when she was scolded by her. The word mom is familiar and it hides a plea. Please look after me, which is obviously a callback allusion to the title of the book. And she only now calls her mom only, trying to hold on to that sort of childhood emotion now that she's gone. In last fall, Jihan was visiting the coastal city of Pohang after a trip and decided on a whim to visit mom. The trip is out of her way, yet she still visited. When she arrives at the house in Changup, carrying an octopus that she brought to eat, she finds it empty. The doghouse is also empty, which is odd to her. Then she finds mom lying on the ground in their shed, slightly writhing in pain. Panicked, Chihan tried to help her, taking her into her lap, and she thought mom was dying. Again, this being in second person POV feels so much more intense than if it was not in second person, if it was in first or third. When she took her up on her lap, it seemed like mom's pain ended and she was able to open her eyes, but she was very, very weak. When she's in Chihan's lap and she sees her, she says she didn't cry when Chihan's aunt died, her sister. Chihan's sort of confused about this, and we get a quick paragraph detailing how Chihan didn't attend her aunt's funeral in spring, the spring prior, despite how much her aunt meant to her in her childhood. And she remembers Hyong-chol telling her that mom didn't cry in the funeral. And so right now, or at least last fall, when mom is in Chihan's lap after writhing in pain, and she just says, I couldn't even cry at the funeral, she asks her why not. And mom says she can't anymore. She says it would trigger a painful headache. And this surprises Chihan. She didn't know mom had headaches at all. This is the moment that shakes Chihan, realizing that she never knew her mother. At this moment, Chihan looks at mom. Her dark eyes, which used to be brilliant and round as the eyes of a cow that is about to give birth, were hidden under wrinkles. This is the first of several mentions of someone comparing mom to a cow. A comparison that reoccurs so much and it feels so wrong. It feels dehumanizing. It's sad. Once, the last example of this appears, I'll give my opinions about it, but like, Jesus Christ. That is so sad. Jihan reflects on her perception of her mother, remembering moments when her uncle, mom's brother, visited her and watched mom react in joy to seeing him. She realizes that her perception of mom was flawed. To you, mom was always mom. It hadn't dawned on you she was a human being who harbored the exact same feeling you had of your own brothers, and this realization led to an awareness that she too had had a childhood. Along with the cow comparison, this juxtaposition of mom as person or mom as a concept keeps coming back as well. And it seems to be an attempt to undo how people perceive their mothers. It calls back to Shin's quote on social chasms opening between generations and the pain that can cause. How earlier generations had this mom as concept idea, and newer generations were breaking this down as Chihan begins to do. Dealing with this knowledge of mom's headaches, she wonders if her siblings know and decides to stay a bit longer until father returned from a trip he was on. She tells mom why she was in Pohang, which was visiting a Braille library for a lecture she was going to give as her books were being translated into Braille. It really affected her knowing that so many people wanted to read her book despite being blind, and mom expresses her wish to have read her books too. She tells her she liked hearing her story of the Braille library, and Shihan can only think of past arguments, of mom telling her not to board planes for fear of crashing, and how their conversations had stopped being this complex. Like I said, they didn't really have a good relationship prior. What she didn't tell her is what she did after Pohang, which was visiting a fish market, buying that octopus that she had before, and looking at the Braille copies she had of her books. She remembers learning to read and write from her second eldest brother, who, under direction from mom, tried to suppress Chihan's left handedness. We also get small, quick moments of mom punishing her for her left handedness. And these internal thoughts don't really comment on anything within the story, but give a rich and detailed history between the characters that we would otherwise not get. It doesn't really describe anything, doesn't really tell anything, just shows a thing in the past that occurred to her that sort of might comment on something, but not fully. She also remembers mom selling a gold ring to help pay for her school tuition when younger. The pain and the love of the past begin to mix together for Chihan, and this is what made her visit mom in the first place last fall. So, last fall, she stays with mom for a few days, staying in the room that mom stores books that Chihan couldn't keep with her. While staying with her, she sees how much pain mom was in. Headaches attacked mom's body constantly. She couldn't cut fish. She would collapse on the ground. She would sleep on the floor of the shed. When mom is struggling to cut vegetables and fish for the food that they're going to make that night, Chihan remembers mom struggling with cutting skate for their ancestral right table, which is a spread to honor their ancestors. Chihan would help, and her fingers would begin to freeze because it was in the winter and be so cold. So one winter, mom decided just not to skin the fish in general and just chop them up. After that, if anything bad happened, father and father's sister, who we'll come back to, would blame it on mom for not skinning the skate. And this is another moment of someone treating her unkindly, specifically father's sister, that reverberate in mom's life. This unfair treatment as mom when looked at as a concept. After cooking the octopus, Shihan tries to convince mom to go to the hospital in Seoul, but mom counters with wanting to go to the mountains on a hiking trip. Shihan keeps pushing for her to go to Seoul that day to get checked up on in the hospital because she's in pain, and mom distracts by asking Chihan what is the world's smallest country, which confuses her, obviously. And mom asks Chihan to get her Rosewood rosary beads from the world's smallest country. And she only says she wants them because Chihan can go anywhere. Because Chihan's career allows her to travel. But mom's afraid of planes and she doesn't really travel, etc. And we'll come back to this moment a little later. Eventually, they go on this hike. She relents. She's like, "Fine, let's go on this hike on the mountain." On a trail Chihan wasn't aware of, another thing that she never knew about mom. She takes her up a hill that overlooks her mom's childhood village, which is now abandoned, Chinmo. Again, she tries to convince her to come to Seoul, and mom mentions their dog. Chihan had noticed the empty doghouse before, and their dog, Chindo, used to be tied next to the shed with a short chain that Chihan tried to get mom to lengthen. She gave her money to fix the shed and the chain, but mom wouldn't do it, and they began arguing because of it. Chihan even went as far as saying that country people were terrible and why'd you treat the dog like that? And that insulted mom, obviously, which made her hang up. And she called to scold Chihan for not calling back after she hung up, who had simply gotten busy and forgotten to call back and is insulted. And then she and then she insults educated people in turn, saying, "Oh, is this why educated people don't have connection or something like that?" A while later, the shed is fixed and the chain is lengthened. This sort of small moment of like their conflict just sort of like building and building and not coming to any sort of resolution. On the hike, mom tells Chihan that she thought death was following her, saying she was feeling someone tapping on her back when there was no one around. And that's when she found the dog Chindo dead in the bathroom. They say that if you take in a person, he will betray you, and if you take in a dog, he will pay you back. I think the dog went in my place. Mom tells her a monk predicted someone in the family would die and believed the dog protected her from death. And Jihan ridicules her for this notion. Jihan thinks of other imaginative stories mom used to tell, like the birds who she thought were their ancestors eating rice, or a man who helped mom weed the field, turning out to be the former owner of the field who died of sunstroke. But now the headaches have made her less present. Shihan recalls a moment in the recent past with her sister, who has 3 kids, asking if mom liked being in the kitchen. We get a quick, detailed history of her sister, who is a pharmacist, having to buy a lot of food and cooking it and hating it, and wondering if this is how mom felt when she was cooking. She guesses that mom didn't like cooking. Shihan again thinks of mom. You had never thought of mom as separate from the kitchen. Mom was the kitchen, and the kitchen was mom. Again, this idea of mom as a concept returns. On the hike, mom tells Chihan that mom's father, her grandfather, died in an accident on a construction site he worked on. Villagers who came to tell grandmother about the accident looked at mom, running and playing in the yard, and said, "You're laughing even though your father has died, you silly child." She was only 3 years old when this happened. She expresses resentment to her mom and her grandmother for not educating her. Jihan in this moment also sort of feels surprised that mom would remember that moment, but doesn't really comment on it. Mom finally agrees to go to the hospital, but on the condition that Jihan wouldn't tell Hyong-chol. There, the doctor tells Jihan that mom had had a stroke before. Confused, Chihan asks how she would have had one without knowing. The doctor said your mom would have known. Given how the blood was pooled there, she would have felt the shock. The doctor said mom was in constant pain. This this delivery, the way this information is conveyed hits so hard being in the second person. As we care about mom as much as Chihan does, the narrative distance has been shortened so much. And the idea that mom is in constant pain feels incongruous, but also sort of aligned with her headaches. How is she able to move around like that if she is in so much pain? And yet she is debilitated because of her pain in small moments. Constant pain versus random headaches. It's almost scary hearing that she's been going through this without anybody knowing. Again, nobody knows. Calling back to her sister's question, one day, uh, it's unclear what time this was. It wasn't last fall, but sometime in the near past, Cheon asked mom if she liked being in the kitchen. She said it didn't matter if she did or didn't, just that she had to be in the kitchen. Chihan pushes for her true feelings, and mom confesses that to deal with her frustration, she'd break jar lids. She would take jar lids, take them out back, and just crash them against the wall. But overall, it was a matter of necessity. And she expresses that the joy that she would feel at seeing her children eating was enough for her, that she was happiest when cooking for them. And Chihan compares this thought with mom's loss of her smile from her headaches. This small sort of idea of, well, if mom was happy because her children were being fed, but she's not taking any more children, what now? Now she just has headaches. Chihan must have returned to Seoul after the meeting with the doctor, and it's unknown if she told mom about her stroke. And throughout the most of the section, we weave throughout Chihan's complex emotions regarding mom, and the closeness of the second person POV makes us feel these complex emotions more viscerally, painting a picture of who mom is and is allowing us to draw our own thoughts of mom. If the things Chihan said to mom, if the things done to Chihan through her life, if the moments after mom's disappearance, if any of those were not in second person, we, the audience, would not feel as strongly. Sure, we could empathize. Obviously, we could. But putting us in Chihan's shoes while she reflects on herself makes us accomplices, victims, and observers all together, which makes this story much more powerful than if it was just in first or third person. The last part of the chapter is Chihan visiting a man to print their missing posters of mom. She notices and compliments his cotton clothing, and he says that his mom made them before she passed away. He says he has a strong allergy, so he can only wear cotton. His mother would sew his clothing, so much so that he began to think of his mom synonymous with her sewing. She was always sewing in his memory. Again, mom as a concept, this time of a family disconnected from their own. When the printing man's mother passed away, he found her closet full of cotton clothing, enough for him to wear for the rest of his life. And this implies that even into his adulthood, his mother kept sewing and sewing. Chihan asks him a question. Do you think your mother was happy? His words were polite, but his expression tells you that you've insulted his mother. My mother was different from today's women. And the section ends. This section has emphasis on the societal thoughts as to what a mom should be, bringing up childhood moments with mom and leading us to find our own opinion of her and the things that happened with her and Jihan. With the second person POV, it feels like these concepts are our own, and we come to our own conclusions regarding the past events. Does it really matter if mom was happy in the end? What does putting someone into the concept of mom do to someone? What did it do to mom? These thoughts revolve around Chihan and us as we also deal with her disappearance. The second section, I'm sorry, Hyong-chol, is the third person limited point of view of young Hyong-chol, the eldest sibling of the family. The shift from second person to third is surprising. In regards to narrative distance, third person holds the most distance between the audience and the story. Obviously, there's some variation depending on the book, but going from the closeness of Chihan to the detachment of Hyong-chol is somewhat alienating. We stop actively participating in the story and are simply observers reading something that's happening in the book. We maintain familiarity as the narration still calls mom mom instead of his mother, showing we are still close to this family though, so we're not losing that intimacy. We find Yang Chol giving out missing flyers in Seoul Station, specifically under the clock tower, and he remembers that mom would wait under the tower for him to pick her up when she visited, always carrying many packages, usually food. Even as Yang Chol's life changes, mom's visits would always revolve around this clock tower, and this visual sort of begins to repeat in the story of mom waiting in Seoul Station under the clock tower. A woman takes this flyer and says she saw mom. The picture is inaccurate, but she recognized her eyes, honest and loyal. She also says mom had a cut on her foot and was wearing blue plastic sandals. Two things to note here. Again, we return to observing her eyes, but not to the comparison of a cow as it usually does. And adding in honest and loyal creates a more positive connotation for our eyes. The honest and loyal descriptor does return, not as much as the cow comparison, but I do enjoy the small moments that do occur, calling her being honest and loyal. Also, secondly, she mentions blue plastic sandals. The woman says mom was last seen in front of the Yongsan Tudong office. She was last seen 1 week ago. The woman guessed that the gash on her foot was from walking for a long time. Chi-han and Hyung-chol discussed this recent sighting, comparing it to other false sightings they'd got. This is where we learn Chi-han's name. And she questions why mom would have gone to the office in the first place. Hyung-chol remembers that that was where his first job had been 30 years ago. Hyong-chol's currently the marketing director for a developer of apartment buildings and has taken time off to search for mom. He remembers his younger brother calling him to tell him that mom went missing and not thinking it was a big deal. Only after a week of her disappearance did Hyong-chol begin searching with the family in earnest. In the current present, it's been a month since she'd been gone. Kyung-chol wants to investigate the Yongsan office sighting and tells Jiyeon to keep her phone on. He reflects how she used to not respond her phone much, busy with her work as a novelist, so much that mom had pleaded with him to check up on her from time to time whenever Jiyeon didn't answer her phone. She would tell him, mom would tell Hyung-chol what if she got her and just couldn't respond or whatever, and so he would go and check up on her. And on one of these visits, Hyung-chol meets Chi-han's boyfriend, Yu Bin, who was briefly mentioned in the last chapter, but like was not pertinent to what I was sharing. Now, Chi-han picks up the phone regularly after mom went missing. This is my first mention of Yu Bin. He was mentioned before. He'll be more prominent later. Just establishing she has a boyfriend. On the taxi drive to the Yongsan Tudong office, Hyung-chol remembers last fall, Chi-han telling him about mom's stroke, and his refusal to believe her, saying mom said she was doing fine. Chi-han said mom didn't want to burden him, and says she feels guilty about him, and Chi-han asks him why she feels guilty. Hyung-chol begins to question why as well. Traveling to Yongsan, he remembers getting the job there 30 years ago after failing to get into a university he wanted, despite his stellar grades in high school. While working the civil service job, he learned of a night law college that he could apply to, like law college at night, that's it, which needed his high school graduation certificate. And so he asked his father to send a copy, but he never got any response from him. And then until the night that he needed to submit the paperwork, he gets a knock at the door and he sees mom being escorted by a coworker to Hyung-chol in the middle of the night. Turns out when Hyung-chol sent a message to father, he was away and mom received it instead. And once his sister had read it to her, she got a copy and took a train to Seoul. Then she was asking around Seoul Station to be taken to the office, and his coworker says he saw her under the clock tower and he took her here. She was wearing blue plastic sandals in the winter, as those were the only ones she wore because she'd hurt her foot farming. Mom had traveled in the cold into Seoul for the first time to deliver the certificate. Hyong-chol took the certificate and felt her cold hands. Grasping them, he vowed to himself that he would make these hands and this woman happy no matter what. Instead of thanking her, he chastises her. I can't help but think, if this was in the second person, how this passage would have read. You vowed yourself to make mom happy, but you rebuked her, almost like foreshadowing that the promise was broken. But that's not how it's delivered. The audience is not asked to participate in this promise. There's only the current emotion there, none of the reflexive emotion within Chihan's section, which is an interesting choice to not include that. Once in the present day, Hyung-chol arrives at the office. Now it's closed for the day. He thinks about the details the woman who saw mom said. The blue plastic sandals she mentioned contradicts what father said that she was wearing. Father said that she was wearing heeled beige sandals when she disappeared. What's the truth? Blue plastic sandals or heeled beige sandals? Kyung-chol remembers the night duty room he slept in that night that mom visited with his high school graduation certificate. They slept side by side, and in the morning he asked her how she liked Seoul. She says it's nothing special and says Hyung-chol, as her firstborn, has allowed her to do so many things for the first time. Hearing her words, Hyung-chol promised himself again. He resolved then that he would earn a lot of money so that when mom came back to the city, she would be able to sleep in a warm place. Kyung-chol wanders from the office to the house where he had rented a room. He shows the current tenants the missing person flyer, and one young man says he saw an older lady with a cut on her foot. As he leaves, Hyung-chol thinks about the promises he's made to her and realizes these promises have faded from his mind as he has lived his life, mostly forgetting about them. He also begins to ask himself the same question Chihan had asked herself: what was he doing when mom disappeared? He was out drinking with coworkers celebrating after success at work. One of his coworkers subtly insults Hyung-chol for a good idea he had, which was actually Chihan's. His company would give promotional gifts to people looking at their model homes, and she suggested giving out concert tickets instead of bath mats, which he began to implement. This proved successful, and the coworker said Hyung-chol could use his clever brain to become a head prosecutor, knowing he'd gone to law school prior. He left angry from this drinking, and he got a headache that night, and Hyung-chol was supposed to pick up father and mom at the station the next morning. But speaking with father, he said that he could handle on their own, that both father and mom could handle it on their own. And so Hyung-chol went to the sauna while father and mom were separated in Seoul Station. His co-worker's comment on becoming the head prosecutor triggers his memory of another promise he's made. As a boy, Hyung-chol made up his mind to become a prosecutor to get mom to return home. We learn that father had an affair with a woman when the children were young and mom had left their home. The other woman had tried to mother them, and the eldest son, Hyung-chol, pushed back. He refused to eat anything she made and turned his siblings against her, and they were just not eating anything. Mom came back after a while and punished Hyung-chol for not eating the food this other woman had made for him, but he stood his ground. He wanted mom back, and he promised to do anything to make her come back. Anything. He named some like chores that he didn't like to do, or like chores that mom didn't like to do that he would do for her. And he promises as well to become a prosecutor to keep her at home. And she agreed, returning home and kicking out the woman, which made father leave as well. Hyung-chol begins studying harder. He thought he had to become a prosecutor to keep mom at home. He was still in elementary school at this point. It's interesting to me that Chihan never mentioned father's affair or him being an absent father. I don't believe it's her refusing to talk about that. More than likely that the memories she came back to never really touched on these moments, but it's still surprising that these aspects of him were not touched on in the first chapter. It's unknown if Chihan even remembers his affair. It's just something interesting to note here that it's a big surprise that he had an affair. I think it's also telling that a kid in elementary school would put so much pressure on himself. Mom would leave the gate unlocked after a while and would leave a bowl of rice outside under a blanket for father. One winter, the children were sleeping together, huddled for warmth, and Hyong-chol remembers father returning. Hyong-chol was barely sleeping. He just kept saw through his eyelids, I think it was. And Hyung-chol saw mom giving father a bowl of rice and welcoming him back as if nothing happened. He remembers mom being disappointed when he graduated college and he started working in a company he still works for. She asked him, "What about being a prosecutor?" And he said he'd try again after 2 years. When he was younger, mom was the presence that got him to continue building his resolve as a man, as a human being. Mom was always there for him, behind him. And he made so many promises to himself for her. He put so much responsibility on himself for her. Throughout Hyung-chol's youth, mom begins to tell Hyung-chol that she's sorry all the time. When Jihan just graduated middle school, mom sent Jihan to live with him in Seoul when he was just 24 years old, saying she needed to get schooling there instead of back home. He remembers meeting at the clock tower in Seoul Station and then going to eat, but she didn't eat anything. She was not even barely touching food. She was not eating at all. When she is dropping Chihan off, she tells him, "I'm sorry, Hyung-chol." Obviously, the title of the section. When he drops her off at Seoul Station, he describes mom's eyes like those of a cow, guileless and kind. In the present, he calls Shihan to update her of the lack of any progress, inviting her to drink. She tells him that she did get a call from a pharmacist at Sobu Pharmacy in Yeoksan-dong, saying he saw mom. She doubts the sighting, as he says she was wearing blue plastic sandals, not the heeled beige ones father had said. And Hyung-chol reacts with surprise and tells her to meet him there at Sobu Market, where they used to live near. They used to live in Yeoksan-dong, the same apartment where mom had left Jihan when Hyung-chol was 24 years old. On the taxi over to Yeokcheong-dong, he thinks over some of the sightings they received. Strangely, they all said they'd seen her in a neighborhood he's lived in. Kaebon-dong, Tarim-dong, Aksu-dong, other Naksan apartments in Tongsu-dong, Suyu-dong, Single-dong, Cheongneung. The sightings would be a few days to a month dry, but substantial enough to note. It's implied, with some information later, that mom is instinctually finding herself at locations in the past that Hyung-chol used to live in. Now with Chihan in the taxi, she brings up full moon harvest approaching soon, a holiday, which the older generation takes to do their ancestral rites, and the younger generation takes to go on holiday. When Hyung-chol's wife prior mentioned going on vacation during this time, Hyung-chol responded with anger, focused on trying to find mom. Cheon says that they should do ancestral rites instead of mom or in place of mom, obviously because she's missing, and he rebukes Cheon for not caring about them before. She says, "I was wrong. I shouldn't have been that way," and sticks her hand in her jacket pockets, a habit that she has gotten whenever he raises his voice. He thinks about an argument that they had had when they lived together in Seoul when he was 24 in Yeokcheong-dong. They were sleeping together on the same bed, him, Chihan, and the second brother, unnamed, never named. But anyways, they were sleeping together in one bed because they were very poor and they could only share one bed. And she was tossing around too much at night, hitting him repeatedly. He angrily yelled at her to go home, which she did, but mom brought her back and demanded her to apologize to him. At this point, Chihan and mom argued a lot, and she was very, very stubborn. When she refused to apologize to him, mom began to cry, saying that Chihan would not listen to her because mom was uneducated. Chihan finally relented, not wanting mom to feel bad, and apologized. She began to sleep with her hands in her pockets to avoid hitting him when she tossed and turned, and any time he raised his voice at her, she'd stuff them in her pockets. A habit picked up. Another habit piled on top of that one. After mom went missing, when someone pointed something out, even something trivial, his stubborn sister would admit, subdued, "I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that." Together, the siblings visit Sobu Market, which has changed since they moved away, but still somewhat familiar. It takes some time for them to find it, but they eventually find it. And at Sobu Pharmacy, the pharmacist asks how mom got lost, which they say just happened to avoid judgment. They used to try to explain, but eventually they just started saying just happened. He asks if she has dementia, which Hyong-chol denies. Throughout this interaction, the pharmacist has this very righteous, judgy sort of way. I like him. I like him a lot. It's a very quick moment here. Chi-han never really responds to his questions, and Hyong-chol responds not in terms of lying, but sort of just denying to remove judgment. But Chi-han doesn't respond to these because she sort of agrees with the questions, but that's not touched upon at all. The pharmacist tells him that he saw her 6 days ago and saw her wearing blue plastic sandals, sleeping next to some trash cans. He saw that the wound, the cut on her foot, had become infected and reinfected, and so he helped disinfect it, which woke her up. He says that mom should have been feeling pain but never reacted. When questioned, she never responded. He asks Hyung-chol and Chi-han if mom was deaf, which Hyung-chol denies, but Chi-han doesn't say anything. Chi-han asks if he was sure that she was wearing blue plastic sandals, and he describes her outfit as father had said. The only difference was her shoes. Chi-han questions more, hoping that the pathetic woman that he's describing isn't their mother. In regards to the picture on the flyer, the pharmacist says it is. This is the same woman. Her eyes are the same. I herded cows when I was young, so I've seen eyes like hers, earnest and gentle. I recognized her even though she looked different, because those eyes were the same. He says he went to call the police in the pharmacy to help her, but when he returned to her, she was gone. Chi-han and Hyung-chol split up to search the neighborhood, but returned to each other empty-handed. Hyung-chol finds a house that he had got, the first one he bought that wasn't an apartment, and mom had visited before with a nickel kettle, and she was so happy to see that he had a room waiting for her there. He finally was able to fulfill one of his promises. Before that, from the night in Yongsang Tudong office to that house, mom didn't have a place to stay the night at all if she would visit Seoul, so she would return to Chongup later at night. Every time Hyung-chol would take her to the station at night, he'd renew his promise to himself to provide for mom. She would tell him, "Here in the city, you are your siblings' father and mother." He had a habit of rubbing his hands together and slouching, which mom would correct, saying he had to be dignified and a role model. Again, she would say, "I'm sorry, Hyung-chol." Every place he begins to visit in search of mom would remind him of the promises he's made to himself and the responsibilities and pressure mom would put on him to be better, to be a prosecutor, to keep her at home, to take care of his siblings. He and Chi-han go drinking, where she tells him that she and Yu Bin will get married when they find mom. She resolves to never get on a plane anymore, honoring mom's fear when she would tell her not to go onto a plane. She shows him a bucket list that she made a year or two ago and feels regret that none of the items on it had anything to do with mom. Now she looks at it and doesn't want to do any of it. This section, being in third person, allows the audience to observe Hyung-chol's life from a further distance than Chi-han's. We don't get the sense of guilt and regret Chi-han has. Hyung-chol begins this section worried, of course, and as he keeps looking for mom, he begins to think about her more and more. He never outwardly says that he only saw mom as the concept of mom, but his slow realization of how much of an effect she had on him growing up makes him think of her more as a person with flaws, goals, and wants. Before, it's as if he didn't really think of her at all, beyond those small moments of promising I'm going to care for her. But when she would not be around him, he would not think of her. Now, he can't help but see her for who she was as a person and a mother. The third person POV helps deliver his detached sentimentality without it feeling malicious or cruel, like how the second person POV of Chi-han would have done. In the last part of this section, Hyung-chol returns home to his wife, drunk. Father had been staying with them while they were searching for mom. In the moments prior where it would dip quickly into an interaction between Hyung-chol and his wife, there would be a mention of father watching them. Arriving at home, Hyong-chol roughly wakes his wife up, angry that she could sleep peacefully while he searches for mom. He blames her for not picking them up from the station, but was visiting their daughter who's been studying for an exam in college, living away from them. And father said that they could do the trip by themselves. Kyung-chol angrily accuses his daughter now of being uncaring for not trying to help find her grandmother, and his wife says she told her to just stay at school because another set of legs and eyes won't add much to everyone else still searching and not finding mom. He gets even more enraged and grabs a golf club and is about to throw it across the room when father interrupts, having been awoken by the argument. His birthday was passed by uncelebrated, and their aunt, his father's sister, had taken care of the ancestral rites. Father takes him out to the living room to calm him down and tells Hyung-chol it's father's own fault, his own fault. He says that they shouldn't fight, that mom has had a hard life because of father, him, but she's kind and she will be found. He says he wants to return home. Alone, Hyung-chol thinks of mom, his anger subdued, and goes to rub his hands, but stops, remembering her attempts to stop his habit. He remembers her telling him that he needs to be dignified. He remembers his promise to her to be a prosecutor and realizes it was mom's dream for him, never knowing that not becoming a prosecutor would hurt her. All the places he's investigated looking for her, all of them revealing these memories. He realized that the mom has lived her entire life believing that she was the one who held him back from his dream. Mom always told him, I'm sorry, Hyung-chol, when she put responsibility and pressure on him. He realizes his refusal or just inability to see her as someone before she got lost, seeing mom as just mom but never mom as someone, and feels regret and collapses with emotion. And the section ends. We get these recurring habits presented to us and the suppression or growth of them. And to me, they are physical representations of the push and pull between mom and Hyung Chol. Maybe an early sign for him to pay attention to, but one he wouldn't or couldn't see. Her reoccurring apology showing that she knew what would happen to him. I wouldn't say that mom hurt Hyung Chol or that Hyung Chol hurt mom, but she had a profound influence that he never realized. And seeing it all in front of him with these memories all of a sudden, and just in front of him, hurts him. Complex emotions laid bare, the third person POV allowing us to observe it without participating in it. I wouldn't say mom hurt Hyung Chol, but as much as mom was the victim of Hyung Chol's flaws, so was Hyung Chol a victim of mom's flaws. This next section, I'm Home, is once again in second person POV point of view, but this time in father's perspective, who returns to Changup alone to their silent home. This part is going to be a little hard for me to cover without strong emotions because, as we'll see soon, the things we learn this chapter are very impactful to mom. I think it's very telling how much footwork has been done in the first two sections to endear us to mom, and then to give us this section and say nothing beyond, hey, this happened, and allows us to just feel. Throughout the last two sections, Chihan and Hyung-chol would reminisce about their childhood or even just recent visits, and the memories would be tinged with warmth and familiarity. But now that father returns home alone, their home is cold and lonely. Father section in second person more or less accomplishes the same thing as Chihan's section, bringing the audience close into the events of the story, as well as creating a distance within father himself. The biggest difference, which is also just a small change, is that whenever the narrator refers to mom, instead of the familiarity of mom, it's your wife. Being in second person, this feels like a reprimand, depending on what's being said. But it also has another meaning that I'll touch on soon. So, mom here is his wife when I'm speaking about her. When father gets home, a woman stands at the gate, calling out for his wife. Her name is Hong Tae-hee, who works for Hope House in Namsang-dong, which is an orphanage. She's looking for his wife, calling her Auntie Park Sonyo, and asks if she was actually missing. She says she was supposed to read her a book. Father lets her in and she tells him about his wife's generosity. She'd been volunteering at the orphanage for the past 10 years, helping bathe the children, do laundry, and tend the garden. She would also donate 450,000 won a month to Hope House. This is equivalent to about 329 USD in 2008 when this book was published. It's also about 335 USD in current year 2024. Throughout these moments, there are short questions that Father asks himself, repeating something Tae had said in question, not really believing it. These kind of inserts of internal questioning is common in first person, are treated the same in the second person, and help illustrate his confusion and incredulity. He simply cannot believe that his wife would be doing all that and is barely taking it all in. It's sort of ambiguous whether he actually verbally repeats the thing or not, but it doesn't really matter. If he would be repeating the same questions, she would still respond in answering. But if he doesn't actually verbalize his thoughts, it doesn't affect the story. It's an interesting sort of vagueness to these sort of moments. But overall, it's just an interesting technical point. He knows that their children would work together to send them 600K won a month, again, which is for about 432 USD in 2008 and about 452 USD in current 2024. And she had secured the use of the money for himself. You wondered where this came from all of a sudden, but your wife asked you not to question how she was using the money. She said she had the right to use the money since she was the one who raised all the children. Previously, she had asked ownership of 3 majigi of land. One majigi is about 500 to 1,000 square meters of land, saying she felt she needed it because her life was pointless. Father said that if she did that, it would be clear that he owned the rest to everyone else. And so she would be losing out, and she relented. But in regards to the money, she stayed firm. One thing that I realize now recording, not when I was writing down, that there is an aspect here a lot in regards to the actions that mom does, is how it is how the people in the village will perceive them, and sort of this idea that society will judge them, and that moves affects mom a lot of her actions. A lot of her actions are her doing them because what might the villagers think. I didn't really catch that when I was writing this, but I catch that. I think about that now. There's so many aspects of the story. I swear to God, there's so many societal like points that are like up in the air, and it's so hard for me to grasp on them. But like the judgment of society affecting how mom acts is a big aspect that I just was unable to think about. Father agreed on the ownership of the money transferring to her, with the added condition of her not being able to ask him for any money. And he saw that she would withdraw 450K won a month, every month, and thought she was just putting it into a savings account. Learning that she was giving it to an orphanage surprised him, and he feels bludgeoned by her. He feels so surprised. Father's treatment of his wife, as we'll see further in the story, is not one involved with love and respect. He did not respect her. He did not care for her. Needing to negotiate with her about money that their children gave to them, negotiating about land ownership, seems to me a thing that a loving married couple should not do. I don't know how much of how father treats his wife, how father treats mom, is part of himself as a person and is part of the culture. I'm not familiar with Korean culture regarding women's rights and the expected treatment of wives, so I cannot fully say that this was expected or not. But I know how the culture was in my Hispanic family, in my Hispanic culture. And all I can say is that it's a common occurrence for a woman, a wife, to not be treated equally. Women's rights as a wife have always been infringed upon. I don't want to get into the whole history, but knowing the systemic and cultural pressure put upon women in just the United States alone, I know that personal freedoms were restricted. Even within a story, the changes in generations highlight the different ways a wife and mother is treated. From Shihan's sister asking if mom liked being in the kitchen, to the flyer printer man saying his mother was not like women now. Obviously, part of the culture of many countries tends to subjugate women. And as to whether the culture was as bad or worse in South Korea, I cannot comment on that. I can only comment on what the book shows me. This is why I hate father. I think I am biased from my own experiences with my own grandfathers, and I'm playing up how much I dislike this fictional man. We'll see throughout the story how wrong father was in treating mom like this. And I think that the use of the second person elevates these emotions. Now, second person father, with the action he does to mom, feel even worse because now we care for her after Chihan and Hyong-chol's sections. And it feels like we are the ones that are doing this to her. Let me be clear. This is not a criticism of the story. I think it's amazing that it does this. I think it's so cool that presenting the stuff that happens to her because of father in the second person makes us so much more viscerally reacting to that is just a feat of writing. Okay, back to the story. Tae tells father that the kids miss his wife in the orphanage, saying that one kid was practically raised by her since he was 6 months old. She had even named him. She had named him Kyun, which causes father to verbally react. She says the young boy was starting middle school soon, and his wife had promised to buy him school supplies. Father again doesn't believe his wife was doing this. Tae also shows him the book that she was asked to read to his wife. She would read to her for an hour each day, and he learns that his wife had lied and said that her eyesight wasn't working well, and that's why she needed to get read. It's Chihan's book, To Complete Love. That's the title. Father wonders if anybody else knew that his wife couldn't read. He thinks about how she reacted when father learned about her illiteracy. Your wife believed that you did everything you did because you looked down on her, because of her illiteracy. Leaving home when you were younger, yelling at her at times, rudely replying to her questions, why do you want to know? He would deny that, but she kept believing that he did that anyways, and he may have unconsciously done so anyways, he admits. Mom's illiteracy is only touched on here and in Jihan's section, and it's not really touched on later beyond in any significant way. Jihan and father may have been the only people who knew she was illiterate, as Hyong-chol sent letters to mom expecting her to reply, and Jihan's sister-in-law says that there were signs in the station, so they expect her to read. We see now that it was father that drove mom to keep this part of her hidden, her embarrassment about it too strong. When Jihan first asked herself, when was it that you realized mom didn't know how to read, it highlights how despite her not knowing mom, this is one thing that she knew that no one else did. Tae leaves after this. Instinctively, he reacts with anger. He thinking that she should have just asked him to read the book to her. He then sort of doubles back, admitting he probably wouldn't have. Before she went missing, you spent your days without thinking about her. He's treating her differently. He was not kind to her. He says, I'm home, to the empty house, and begins walking through it, hoping that she would just appear. He reflects that he never wanted to stay in the house in the first place, leaving for long periods of time. He'd be gone for, at the most, 3 seasons long. And then he would come back, mostly as a necessity than a want. His children were a draw. He came back mostly for his children, but not his wife. We saw this in Hyong-chol's section regarding his affair, but it's shown here that it's much worse than just a one-time thing. His wife was not a reason he would return, only her familiarity. Before you lost sight of your wife on the Seoul Station subway platform, she was merely your children's mother to you. Only after she went missing that she became his wife, which makes the second person POV also stand out. Every time it says your wife, it's like hammering down on his guilt. Now he sees her as his wife, but it's too late now. Again, we have mom as a concept of mom and not as a human. If Jihan's concept of mom was just as a caretaker and Hyong-chol's was just of distance, father's concept is of cruel intended negligence. He can now see clearly how her health began to decline for the past 2 to 3 years. She's become numb to things and to forget things, which was not how she used to be, so focused on small details. He knew about her headaches and her confusion because of them, but simply ignored them. When she was unconscious from the headaches, he convinced himself that she was just sleeping, and grew angry at her for sleeping wherever she wanted to. He reprimanded her when she was losing motor functions, unable to cut food, and ignored her loss of timekeeping. When he goes around the house calling out, "I'm home," he expects her to respond as she usually would, saying, "You're home." He begins missing her nagging, her wanting him to stop his frequent drinking for his health and safety. When his wife would go to Seoul to visit family by herself, if he called her and asked when she was coming home, she would ask if he missed her and he would deny it. But she would come home the next day. His wife still loved him, or at least cared enough for him to do all that, and he could not return the sentiment. When she would return, he would chide her about it, and she would say she didn't come back for him, she just came to feed the dog. Sort of just as a jokey pushback, sort of reading the room, not giving him too much, but still, it's sad that she would have to joke about that. He says he was nomadic because of his childhood. When you slept at home, you were overcome by anxiety that someone would rush to the gate to grab you. He would come back because of the things his wife did and the children, and then set off again when he grew restless. He remembers the same winter night that Hyong-chol did after returning home while his children had huddled for warmth, and the bowl of rice his wife made for him. It's stated here that this was the last time he left the house because of the children. Now he searches the house, desperately calling out for his wife, and begins to feel fear. He imagines this is how his wife felt when he would leave. You left this house whenever you wanted to and came back at your whim, and you never once thought that your wife would be the one to leave. So there's a double standard here, where father, as a man, could do whatever he wanted to do without any repercussions, but his wife, a woman, can't. And if she did do what she wanted, it reflects badly on her. The one time he was punished for it was when Hyong-chol rebelled against him and the woman he had an affair with. And even then, his wife let him come back as if nothing happened. And yes, this is also a critique on who mom was to allow this to happen, or at least not fight against it. But again, similar to whether she liked the kitchen or not, it didn't matter if she liked what father was doing as long as the children were cared for. All this is so complex and laden with a history I don't know, a culture I haven't experienced, and a life I've never really had. But I have to honor my emotions that were created by this story. It's not fair to Sonyo. It's not fair to Chihan or Hyung-chol. It's not fair that she's missing, and I hate father for that. Returning to the story, father remembers the first time he met his wife. After the, I believe, Korean War, 1950s, North Korea soldiers would raid villages, and a rumor spread that young single daughters will be stolen by them. And so many young women in that area were hurriedly married off. Sonyo lived in Chinmo, which was 10 ri from his village. 1 ri is 0.244 miles, about. So it's about 2 miles away from Chang'e, close to father's home. And his sister said that Sonyo's horoscope matched his. Their marriage was arranged. He was more or less ambivalent about this pairing, and he was pretty much ready to run away with some friends anyways. But for some reason, he decided to go to Chinmo to meet her, see her. He goes there and he hid in the foliage as he watched a young Sonyo speaking with her mother, asking if she had to get married, and her mother saying she'd get kidnapped if not. Her mom laments not being able to get her educated. She also says her horoscope reading was beneficial and she would be, mom Sonyo would be successful. When Sonyo begins crying, eventually her mother begins crying too. This moment that father has spied on made him decide to stay feeling empathy towards her, not wanting her to be dragged away to the mountains. If he hadn't seen this moment, he would have left and not gotten married. And I think this is probably the only time. No, there's more times. This is the first and only time that he shows true positive emotion towards his wife. In the cold and lonely house, father sleeps for 3 days after returning from Seoul. It was hard for him to rest at Hyong-chol's. He thinks about his lack of love for his wife, but still recognizes that he would think of her if he was away for too long, focusing on the good aspects that she had. She had a knack for taking care of and raising animals, from dogs to chickens to gardens. Her talent was such that even your sister, who endlessly found fault with your wife, would call her and ask her for help sowing the fields and planting pepper seedlings. When he wakes after the third night, he sees on top of the cupboard a box with a yin yang symbol. He remembers seeing it for the first time. One dawn, his wife called to him, and even though he was awake, he didn't care to respond. When she comes to the room, he pretends to sleep, and so he hears her speaking to him as if he was asleep. She had prepared their shroud for when they passed and put them in this yin yang box. She had gotten them made out of hemp and was very happy with it. She remembers an aunt dying and her husband feeling regret at not getting her a good shroud, and felt regret at making her work hard all her life. His wife didn't want that to happen to him, so she splurged on the shroud and got it made out of hemp, made it really expensive, and was really happy about it. He remembers her saying, "You should go before me. I think that's for the best." She said that there was an order and told him that she'd be fine living without him, but he could not. He's been waited on all his life and would be a burden. She promises to give him a good burial. I don't believe she said this with malice, only care. She was being realistic and did not want him to be looked down upon by their family. She says it with care, even though the words, though somewhat true, can be hurtful. She says that an old man living alone is a burden to people, but an older woman can survive on her own. Father opens the box and looks at the hemp shrouds for the first time and thinks to his wife that she promised to bury him first, almost like a reprimand. But it definitely feels like an expression of anger because of grief. This is one of the first times we see Father actively grieve for his wife. Later that day, two young girls run into the house who are children of Taesop, an owner of a Chinese restaurant in Seoul, who left his children to the care of his elderly mother living in Cheongup. The two girls begin to look around for his wife as she was helping feed them. Their elderly grandmother can barely take care of herself. Here we see more examples of more children that his wife was taking care of. From the orphanage to these girls, we can see that his wife was actively seeking out to care for a child, since now their own children are adults. Maybe, as she said, her life was feeling pointless when she tried to get the land ownership, she needed to take care of a child to feel worthwhile, as that's the only thing she knows how to do, and the only thing she did the majority of her life. She only felt happy when a child was happy. Father feeds the girls instead and can't bring himself to tell them that she's missing. He thinks about losing her at the station. It took some time for him to realize that she was not on the train with him. He got off at Namyang Station and felt terror. The moment when you had to confirm that you left your wife in Seoul Station, that you'd boarded that train and traveled one stop away, the moment that you turned around, accidentally hitting the shoulder of the person next to you, you realize that your life had been irreparably damaged. And he realizes it's his fault, just as he had said to Hyong-chol. He had a speedy gait. He would walk quickly. He had a habit of walking in front of his wife. She would always comment on it, pleading for him to slow down, to walk side by side with her. She would comment on it, and he would stop and wait for her, and she'd be embarrassed because of how slow she was. She would try to tell him that people would judge them. Again, an example of how she was affected by judgment of others. They would say that they hated each other so much if they saw them walking like that. She told them he didn't even need to hold her hand, just to walk slower. She had always told him to walk slower. You'd stop and wait for her, but you'd never walk with her, conversing with her as she wanted, not even once. He never respected her love. Do you remember when Chi-han was trying to imagine mom going missing? People shove past you as you stand on the platform where mom was wrenched from father's grasp. Chi-han believed that mom was holding father's hand, but she wasn't. He never held her hand. He walked ahead of her. He got on the train before she did, and the crush of the crowd kept her separate from him, and that was the last time he saw her. Mom was not wrenched from father's grasp, as Chi-han believed. I cannot fully articulate why this small detail rings so loud for me. I do not blame Chi-han for believing that. I think it was more of an expectation from her that a happily married couple would hold hands on a busy train station so as to not get lost, to not get separated. But they weren't a happily married couple, weren't they? They were only married by name, at least to father. To father, she was just his children's mother. He never held her hand. And the most insidious thing to me is that no one knew. Nobody knows. Since your wife has gone missing, your heart feels as if it will explode every time you think about your fast gait. Now does he regret? Now does he regret? Okay. Back to the story, he feels his leg, which was operated on for arthritis previously, but he can't really bend it properly, and he knows that his wife would have immediately offered to soothe his leg. It's a parallel of the shroud, of her care for him. He had hoped she'd cared for him after his death, and now she's not there. Father begins to cry. He hasn't cried before, not in front of his children. Almost like his wife, who also couldn't cry, but from her headaches. We're shown moments in his past where he couldn't cry. When his parents died from cholera when he was 10 years old. When he was protecting his family's cow, North Korean soldiers beat him to take it away. When the North Korean soldiers speared bamboo through his neck, he couldn't cry then. He confesses to himself his knowledge of his wife's ailments and his attempt to not think about them. He confesses to himself that he would draw attention away from her, the kind of person to respond to her saying her stomach hurt with him saying his back was hurting more. He never cared for her when she was sick, never gave her warm water when her stomach was upset. His wife had stomach problems. He was away for 2 weeks one day, and when he returned, he had a daughter, Chi-han. His sister had helped deliver the baby, but his wife had diarrhea. He gave his sister money to buy some Chinese medicine. Not sure what that is. They just kept saying Chinese medicine and describe it as like a packet. Which, as he's crying, realizes that that was the only time he paid for medicine for his wife. His sister got her 3 packets of medicine when his wife wanted 5. His wife would blame later stomach issues on not having those 2 extra packets of medicine. When she would have stomach issues later in life, she would stop eating, saying that food would not help her feel good. Now, I think of previous mentions of her not eating, such as that dinner with Hyong-chol. There are other mentions of her not eating prior with Chi-han that I know that happened. I just don't remember. I couldn't find them. I know they were there. She didn't eat. How common were her stomach problems? The doctors told Chi-han that mom was in constant pain, but from her stroke. What was she feeling? How was she surviving? When she had these stomach problems, father would try to get her to the hospital, telling her to go, but not offering her to take her. And she would refuse. In the past, father had left home in the summer and returned in the winter. When he did, he found a lump on his wife's left breast. She didn't react to it, but he only took her to the hospital when her nipple caved in and filled with discharge. The hospital said they'd get her results back in 10 days. 10 days to see what was wrong. Father doesn't remember what happened in those 10 days after. Doesn't remember what he was doing to not go back to the hospital after those 10 days passed. When her nipple became abscessed, then he finally took her to the hospital. They learned she had breast cancer. But the doctor and his wife were confused. The doctor said she was not at high risk at all, but still got cancer. Her viewpoint was more practical. Your wife said that was impossible. She didn't have time to lie in bed sick. She had too much to do. The things she needed to do surpassed her concern for her own health. Did she like being in the kitchen? Did it matter that she had cancer? And the tragic part? If you had gone back to hear the results right away, they might not have had to cut off her breast. After the surgery, she went back to farming. The next day, still wearing the bandages, they had to sell the field to pay for the surgery. Because of this, she refused to go to the hospital ever again and wouldn't let him near her, just in case he found another lump. She blamed the hospital visit and his discovery of the tumor on the loss of the field and her breast. No wonder she tried deflecting Ji-hoon's pleas to take her to the doctors last fall. No wonder she didn't want Hyong-chol to know. Neither of them ever mentioned her cancer. Neither of them ever mentioned the mastectomy. Much like her illiteracy, she was embarrassed and frustrated with her circumstances. I don't know if they know. Obviously, it's pretty hard not to notice a mastectomy, but they never mention anything. They never touch upon this because it's not important to them. Before they were to travel to Seoul for their birthdays, she had more stomach problems. She would self-medicate with food, something father looked down upon. She was forgetting more and more. Father only explained it away. You assumed that ailments would be a constant companion at this age, and you thought your wife was at that stage too. He never sought to help her. Father's lamentation is interrupted by his sister arriving. She had lived with them until 40 years ago, when she built a house on a new road. Every dawn, she'd walk around his house, checking to see if they'd survived the night, which would wake his wife. His sister had lost two older brothers and their parents years before, almost losing father in the war as well, and lost her husband in a fire. Father's sister and her relationship with his wife has been touched on briefly in the past sections. Small moments that I hadn't really touched on, but even in those brief moments, she's already being built up. She did not have a good relationship with his wife. She was not kind to her and always found fault with her. Everyone in father's family liked his wife, maybe even more than they liked him, except for his sister. Father's youth has been sprinkled in here and there along with his sisters. They were very poor, hurt by the war, and the after effects of it. There is an explanation of why they are the way they are, but not an excuse. Seeing how they treated his wife throughout her life and brushing it off as just a product of their time is not how people heal. Father asks her why she started smoking again. She begins to smoke there, and she only responds by asking him why he came back. When he says that he thought his wife would be here, she says that she'd have called him if she did. She chastises him for acting the way he is, telling him he needed to be looking for his wife. He's surprised at her words, as if she's never spoken about his wife like this. She nagged his wife for not having children 2 years after they got married, and when she finally gave birth, she was dismissive of her. She never helped around the house when she lived with them. His sister says she wanted to apologize to her. He knew how she treated his wife. She acted more like their mother-in-law than sister-in-law, as father was her only family left alive. She says to him, I wanted to say sorry about 3 things before I died. That I was sorry about Kyun, and about the time I screamed at her for chopping down the apricot tree, and about not getting her medicine when she had stomach problems. Father thinks about Kyun, the name of the young boy in the orphanage that his wife had named. Kyun was the name of their younger brother. His sister asks him if he thinks Kyun went to heaven and remarks that he would be looking for his wife too, if he was alive. She wonders how he'd be if they grew old together. We learn of the 3 things his sister wanted to apologize for. When a 17-year-old Sonyo and a 20-year-old father got married, his younger brother Kyun was in 6th grade. He was very smart and well-liked in the village and wanted to go to middle school. But father and his sister could not afford it, so they couldn't send him to one. He begged and begged, but they never could. Eventually, Kyun begged Sonyo to send him to school. She cared for him and wanted to sell the garden to pay for his education. Hearing this, father's sister sent Sonyo back to her hometown, sort of exiling her because of her anger. Father went to her mother's house 10 days later, drunk and angry, and overheard her mother telling her to stay with her. Sonyo didn't want to leave, but only stayed the night, saying that where father was her home. The next morning, he practically dragged her back home, and when they crossed the threshold of their village, he let go of her hand and walked ahead of her. She pleaded with him to move slower. When they got home, Kyun promised Sonyo to not ask to go to school anymore so that she wouldn't have to leave. A parallel with Hyong-chol. He had to become a prosecutor so she would stay at home. Kyun had to not go to school so she could stay at home. Kyun begins working in their farm, helping her grow food and take care of livestock. They worked together and grew even closer, becoming a faithful companion whenever father left. Eventually, as he got older, he got a job in the village and used his first paycheck to buy Sonyo better farming equipment. At first, she didn't really accept it, but he insisted and he kept getting her newer equipment. Among them was a nickel basin that was so used throughout her years that it became white. The nickel basin appears multiple times in the past sections and will appear in the future as well, sort of as a symbol of what Kyun meant for Sonyeon. Father wasn't home when their second child was born, but Kyun was. It was winter and there was no firewood, so Kyun had to chop down the apricot tree in the yard to make a fire. When his sister saw that, she yelled at Sonyo for having it cut down, saying that cutting down a family's tree will make family members start dropping dead. Kyun defended her and told his sister that it was his idea. His sister yelled at him and called him a bastard. He left them after that. Kyun was gone for 4 years, hoping to earn money. Eventually, he returned, penniless, but Sonyo welcomed him warmly, as if his absence was nothing. But he changed. His eyes were no longer animated and was constantly gloomy. They never learned what happened to him in those 4 years, but father believed the world had been unkind to him. 20 days after he returned, Kyun walked over the spot where the apricot tree stood and collapsed, beginning to convulse. Sonyo ran to find father, who was playing a game with some men in the village. She had to flip the table to get him to listen to her because when she came, she was saying that something was happening to Kyun. Father would just did not care. She had to flip the table so he would pay attention, and she ran ahead of him when they were headed to help Kyun. It was the first time she had gone ahead of you running. When they arrived, Kyun had died. Somehow, a rumor spread that Sonyo had poisoned Kyun, which for some reason his sister believed, yelling at her that she had killed Kyun. Sonyo was taken to the police station and told the police to put her away if they really thought that she killed Kyun. Her grief began to hurt her, making her tear out her hair and demand to be arrested and run around the hills in grief, yelling out his name. The grief had hurt her so badly. Father refused to help. Now you realize how cowardly you were. You lived your entire life heaping all of your pain onto your wife. Kyun was your brother, yet your wife was the one who needed to be consoled. But because you refused to speak about it, you'd driven her into a corner. I believe this is when mom suffered her stroke. Her grief over Kyun and the stress of father's sister, along with his refusal to talk about Kyun, might have caused a stroke that would affect her later in life. Sonyo buried Kyun with someone else she hired, and father never asked to see the grave. Father recognizes that his wife changed after Kyun's death. She was slow to smile and it disappeared too quickly and had trouble sleeping. Before she went missing, father would refuse to talk about Kyun, avoiding any emotion about it. Jihan had asked father if mom had a deep shock, saying a doctor had said so, and father refuted it. He refused to take her to a psychiatrist as a doctor had recommended to Jihan. At one point, she told him Kyun didn't appear in her dreams anymore, and he thought she'd forgotten about him. People appearing in dreams is a small detail that I just think about when I wrote this. I thought about when I was writing it. Something people live on in memory and dreams. We'll return to this later briefly, but I didn't collect enough information about dreaming because I was writing this. But that's also an aspect of the story. Father thinks about Kyun and his death, his apathy towards his wife. He realizes he should have listened to his wife. She began to wake in the middle of the night, sleepwalking and running to hide somewhere, experiencing a nightmare. The years of silence after you had blamed it on her and didn't even let her talk about it, that pressure might have pushed your wife toward her pain. Only now does he realize this. Only now does he begin to regret this. The last part of this section has Jihan calling father at dawn. She asks him why he went home, and she asks if she should visit. Father knows that she's the most energetic in looking for his wife. He believes she's still single. He doesn't know if you've been her boyfriend. The trail for his wife ran cold after the Sobu pharmacist. There's no more leads. Chihan frequents emergency rooms, checking patients without family, but the trail has run cold. She sounds like she's been drinking. Father tells her it's his fault that mom went missing. He says she had a headache and was resting her head in the nickel basin filled with ice. She was in a lot of pain. He said he should have insisted on them staying, but his old habit of not treating her like a sick person took over. Old habits again. They decided to leave despite her pain. Chihan says it's her fault that mom had a headache. She was calling her to tell her that she would be in Beijing instead of the birthday. Mom was pouring liquor into a bottle for the youngest child, fifth child, I believe, and Chihan reprimanded her for encouraging his drinking. If he makes a scene for his drinking, it would be mom's fault. Mom said she'd get some rice cakes instead, and Chihan told her not to do that because no one ate them, and told her she just sticks them in the freezer, and she still has some there that are like 3 years old. Chihan told her not to act like a country bumpkin. When mom asks if she really stored the cakes and didn't eat them, Chihan said yes, and mom begins to cry. Chihan tells father that she only really told her all that so that it would be easier for mom to travel and have to carry so much food. Mom called her a bitch. Chihan grew angry. It was hot in Beijing. She was uncomfortable. She yelled at mom. She yelled that she hoped mom was happy that she had a bitch for a daughter and hung up on her. She knew that mom hated it when they yelled and she was going to call back and apologize but forgot to. And she believed that if she'd called and apologized, mom wouldn't have had a bad headache and thus would have been able to follow father better. But she didn't and she got lost. Now she's gone. And Chihan's crying and she's spiraling. She thinks it's all her fault. And father stops her. And he says mom was proud of her. She would show the people in the town when she was in the newspaper. She had someone from Namsang Dong read to her Chihan's book. He tells her to keep writing, to say something. He lived his life not talking to his wife, missing his chance to love her. And now he has so much to say to her, but he can't. He asks Chihan, please, please look after your mom. Chihan and father cry with each other over the phone. Father accepts his part in her life and knows that Chihan will remember her even if no one else will. That your wife truly loved the world and that you loved her. This chapter is called I'm Home, I think simply because that's what father repeats and that he is at home, but I can also say that it's a personal statement of his wife, of mom. I'm home. She is home. The one he would return to. If not his wife, his home. And now she's gone, and his home is gone. It's just his wife, who is not there. We sit with father as these horrible revelations come to him of his part of hurting mom. Sonyo became mom after Kyun died, stayed mom for most of her life to her children, and then became his wife when she was gone. The frequent use of your mom, as I said, hammers it down how much he misses her, and he missed out. A true tragedy that he caused in her. And now he's pleading to Chihan to correct, to find mom, to look after her, because he never did. It's telling that the two people who hurt mom most are the two sections in second person POV, and that they are talking to each other to try to parse out their emotions regarding mom, regarding how much they hurt. This is where the section ends. The penultimate section, Another Woman, is much harder for me to conceptualize. If the last section, I'm Home, was hard to talk about through with my emotions, strong emotions about it, this section is a little harder to talk about because I don't know how to feel about it. It's set in the first person perspective of mom, of Park Son-yo. Parts of it is in second person as she is speaking to someone specifically, not like the dissonance within Chihan and father. Son-yo is in a different state of life. I cannot tell if she's dead or alive. She is present within the story and the world, yet is occupying the position of an omniscient narrator. I find it hard to talk about what this section means because of this limbo state she's in, but I'll try my best to analyze it for what it is. and what it might mean and stuff like that. We'll see. You'll see when I start getting into it. It begins in a neighborhood with a lot of pine trees. The way it's written, with the setting just appearing and her confusion, it feels like mom just popped in here. She wants to visit you first. She's the second person, and then she's gonna visit him, a him that she imagines having planted the pine trees for her to be sitting on, because she's sitting on a pine tree now. She doesn't know how anyone can find their homes when they all look so identical. The way she speaks in second person to someone, we quickly learn it's to her daughter, which we'll find out is her fourth child, not Jihan. It is winter, and mom went missing during the summer. Mom watches her daughter and her three children as one of them spots a dead bird in front of the gate. Her daughter looks at it, and somehow mom knows what she's thinking about. There had been a lot of birds attracted here because she spread seeds on the lawn, and looking at the dead bird in front of the gate, she thinks about mom. Mom herself identifies the dead bird as a black-bellied plover and remarks how strange it is since they're coastal birds, and she'd seen one before in Kamzo where he lives. This section likes to hide information from us, as we don't know who he is right now. When I first read it, I speculated talking about father or Hyong-chol, but the details were too new to be either one of them. It feels like we are just seeing a glimpse of mom's running thoughts. A bit later, Chihan calls her sister to tell her that she was going to go to Santiago, Chile, but her sister yells at her. She says she saw a dead bird that day and had a bad feeling about mom. She accuses Chihan of running away from her problems. When she begins to cry, Chihan visits to talk it out. Throughout, mom is speaking to her daughter with pleading or side comments, commenting on what she does or what happens. These feel like internal thoughts, and it reads like she obviously knows she won't get an answer when she's talking to her daughter, won't hear her, and is okay with that. When Chihan and her daughter, Chihan's sister, she's not named either, which is I do think is a problem, but whatever. Uh, Shihan agrees not to leave and ends up just falling asleep on the couch, exhausted. When she's awoken, she tells her sister about meeting Yubin's mother, who's so old that his sister helps take care of her, and they call each other sister. She doesn't know how to feel about learning this about her boyfriend, doesn't offer any thoughts about it, and just sort of lays it out. This is what happened. And it's just another show of how a mother can be. Chihan asks her sister to tell her something about mom, but her sister can't. Here, mom expresses an interesting thought. I have to go now, but I can't seem to make myself leave. The whole day has gone by while I was sitting here. Then a paragraph break occurs, and we begin in the middle of a scene. I'm not sure why she has to go or where. It's never really written out, besides from her moving to visit him. And the whole day has gone by, followed by the next scene. It feels like we're skipping around different periods of the present, as if mom is only present for some time and sometime not. The scene that follows is her daughter being bombarded with needs and wants by her three children, and calmly and adeptly dealing with them. Mom comments on this, expressing her awe at how she's doing this. She turns to the window, her daughter, and looks at mom. And then she mumbles, I've never seen that bird before. Mom is a bird, I guess? Spoiler alert, she's not a bird later in this chapter. Maybe she's inhabiting a bird's body. She said that she imagined him planting the tree that she's sitting on, so she's sitting on the tree as a bird. Any speculation will begin to dive into a more imaginative and genre-based answer that will undermine the groundedness of this book. But for now, it seems like mom is a bird and will no longer be a bird soon, but is still there. She and her children approach the window to see mom better. Mom looks at the young children and apologizes to them. She confesses blaming them for her daughter being hurting during her pregnancies. She knows that the children don't like her as much as their paternal grandmother, mainly because of this small animosity. Mom notices the braid in her granddaughter and remembers how she didn't have time to brush and braid her daughter's hair, so she cut into a bob. She then turns to her daughter to apologize. She apologized for her judgment when her daughter had a third child. She recognizes it was her choice to do so, even if mom didn't want that for her. Mom was angry with these choices, as if she didn't want to see her daughter become a mother like her, knowing how much pain that comes with. Mom remembers how much joy her daughter brought her. She was actually her fifth child, as her actual fourth was stillborn. Father wasn't home at that time because of how absent he was, and she had that man bury the dead child. She resolved to not let anybody see another stillborn baby get birth, so when her fourth was born, she gave birth alone. Her daughter's birth marked a lot of changes in her life, as they were no longer in poverty. She was able to go to kindergarten, unlike her first three children. Mom was very proud when she went to university and confessed that her first three children had made her feel regretful and guilty for the decisions she had to make for them. But her second daughter was the first child she felt actual happiness at. Some memories pop up for her. Her daughter growing up and joining social movements in university. One time there was a funeral for a protester, and it was the first time mom had visited her school and seen a huge group of people. Because of the crowd, her daughter had tried to help her. You told me, Mom, if we lost each other, don't walk around, just stand still. Then we'll be able to find each other. She laments not remembering that when she got lost. Her daughter helped give mom many firsts in Seoul, showing her different places whenever mom visited. Mom wanted her daughter to be free from everything, as they were no longer poor. And with that freedom, you often showed me another world, so I wanted you to be freer. I wanted you to be so free that you would live your life for other people. Again, mom apologizes to her daughter, especially at causing her pain because of her disappearance. She has to take care of her children, so she hasn't been able to search for mom as much as Shihan has. Mom says that when her mind was clear, she would think about her and her children and the life she'd made for herself. Mom's complex feelings about her daughter's choices are interesting to me. She didn't want her to become a mother, expressing her disappointment whenever another child was born. Mom knew what motherhood would do to someone and didn't want that for her daughter. Whenever she would see her daughter be scatterbrained or too tired, she'd feel bad. She knew it was because she was a mother. But she also recognized that it was her daughter's own choice to have more children. She knows that despite what she had to go through, her daughter still decided to become a mother, and yet does not seem like she suffered as much as mom did. Sure, we got her telling Chihan about her frustration with cooking all the time and her thoughts on mom not liking being in the kitchen, but overall, her daughter's experiences weren't as hard as mom's was. Perhaps mom felt resentment at that, which is why she wanted to apologize so much. Mom tells her daughter to rest and bids her goodbye, telling her not to feel sad as she gave mom so much joy in her life. She also expresses her want to remove her blue plastic sandals. She notes how unkempt she is and how her head hurts. Now she's not a bird. Was she ever? Who knows? This sort of limbo state that she's in, she has agency, but decides not to go to her family. So she's definitely not alive, but she's not dead yet. She's still on a simple track, but can move around, but knows she's heading somewhere. It's not explained. And I think it's fine that it's not explained. It's just is. She transitions to Kamzo, the coastal city she mentioned before, where he lives. She finds an empty house and moves on to a hospital. She sees an elderly man being tended to by a doctor and a younger man. They ask him for his name, and he only responds with names of famous actors, specifically actors that mom likes. And then he says Park Sun-young as his name. And she pleads to him to say his own name, Lee Yun-gyu. We learn about Sonyo and Yoon-gyu. In the past, when Jihan was recently born, Sonyo was walking home with Kyun's nickel basin filled with flour to make food for them at home. Yoon-gyu, on a bike ride, rode up to her and offered to help carry it home. It took some convincing, but she agreed because it was so heavy. And when she arrived at the location, he said he'd leave the flour. There wasn't anything. He robbed her, obviously. Despondent, she eventually tracked him down. She found his bike in the lawn and found the house. And there she saw an elderly woman with a young child on a porch, and inside was Young-gyu. She didn't know his name at that point, but there was him, his pregnant wife, giving birth in the living room. Immediately, Sonyo went to help, aiding in the child's birth. She took some of her flour and made food for them. A week later, after returning home with the nickel piece filled with flour, she returns to check on them, and she finds that his wife had died from complications after birth. So Sonyo helped breastfeed the child, despite barely having enough milk for Chihan herself. That's when they exchange their names, which is where we learn that Sonyo means little girl, while her sister Taenyo means big girl. Yoon-gyu and his father Kang-gyu means silver coffer and gold coffer, respectively. And since then, they became great friends. He helped her bury her stillborn. He listened to her when she talked about Kyun. In fact, she only really visited when something bad was going on with her life and she needed a shoulder to cry on. If he ever tried to visit her at home, she'd turn him away. Eventually, he moved to Kamzo as his unreciprocated love for her unstated. That's my like there's subtext there. He loved her. That's what I'm reading. It could be read something else, but I read in the story that he loved her. She did not love him. She cared for him. She didn't love him like he loved her. His unreciprocated love for her was too much for him to handle. So that's why he moved to Kamzo, and yet she still went to Kamzo following him when she felt bad, and when she got there, he was there to help her deal with whatever was wrong. Mom felt sorry for treating him like that, knowing that only seeing him when she was unsettled was wrong for him. Together, she would tell him stories that Chihan would tell her, and expressed they wanted to visit Santiago, Chile. But she didn't really want to go, only Chihan did. She just wanted to talk to him because she found Chihan interesting and wanted to emulate her. When he offered to take her to Santiago, she stopped visiting him, feeling guilty for lying to him. Mom begins to contemplate the present. I love this page a lot, and I don't understand it. She asks herself, but also talking to Young-gyu, do you know what happens to all the things we did together in the past? This is in the perspective of her being in the limbo state, so this is like present, quote unquote. She asked this once before to Chihan, who said that the past seeps into the present. And talking to Young-gyun now, Mom asks if he thinks that events now are linked to the past and future. How she looks at her daughter's children and can't connect them to herself. I told myself that I was not going to read entire pages of this book, just do quotes of like small lines here and there to illustrate my point when I'm analyzing it. But this page is definitely one of the most impactful ones for me. And I think if I am to read one whole page, it's going to be this one. Do you know what happens to all the things we did together in the past? When I asked my daughter about this, although it was you I wanted to ask, my daughter said, it's so strange to hear you say something like this, Mom, and asked, wouldn't they have seeped into the present, not disappeared? What difficult words! Do you understand what that means? She says that all the things that have happened are actually in the present, that old things are all mixed in with current things, and current things mingle with future things, and future things are combined with old things. It's just that we can't feel it. But now I can't go on. Do you think that things happening now are linked to things from the past and things in future? It's just that we can't feel them? I don't know. Could that be true? Sometimes when I look at my grandchildren, I think that they were dropped down from somewhere out of the blue and that they have nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me at all. Would it had seeped in somewhere, the fact that the bicycle I saw you on when we first met had been stolen, that before you saw me walking down the avenue with the basin of flour on my head, you had planned to sell that stolen bicycle for a strand of seaweed. Or the fact that you ended up not being able to sell the bicycle, so you went to put it back where you found it, but the owner caught you and you got into trouble. Did these events seep into a page of the past and bring us all the way here? Of these books that I want to cover, I'll try to narrow down to one page that I want to read out, just to limit myself. And this page is the most beautiful, in my opinion. This page is full of this sort of philosophical, uh, present time perception stuff like that that I really kind of don't understand. But I like the writing of it, and I like that it makes you think. Mom knows that Young-gyu attempted to find her in Seoul after she went missing, and that this was the first time that he ever even visited Seoul. He thinks his pain made him sick, which is why he's in the hospital now. She tells him to say his name the next time they ask him for it. No one will ever know about their relationship. As she made it so, she leaves him in the hospital. Traveling with mom, we get some internal thoughts that we would have never gotten from her family. Judging from the first two sections, you'd think that Hyong-chol was her favorite child, and while I think it's not fair to say that she has a favorite, it's still interesting to see the actions she's done for Hyong-chol and Chi-han compared to her sister. It's just another showing of how complex one person can be and the secrets they hold. Mom's ephemeral status, coming and going, not able to affect the world around her, makes this section feel like a dream. She's here and not here. Mom watches and comments, sometimes as a bird, sometimes as a ghost, maybe. She's not dead, but the way she says, it's time for me to move on, it's time for me to go now, it feels like it's leading down that. When we arrive with her back home, we know it's her last stop. She's gone first to the two people who meant the most to her and returned to the home she's had for 50 years. She's again speaking to someone specifically, father, but he's not here. So, in a way, it's like she's speaking to the home itself. Sort of, again, I'm home, now it's father that's home. He's not there, so she's speaking to the home, but she's still directing her thoughts to father. It's a little, it's weird. It's different. You just kind of have to accept it as is. The house again is cold and lonely. The way that it's described, it's almost as if a ice storm went through and froze everything. She remembers renovating it many times and reminisces about the emotions she's felt here. She compares it to home when filled with people. House is alive only when there are people living in it, brushing against it, staying in it. She sees her home and sees it old and broken and alone. She wonders if father's in Seoul looking for her. She wants the house to be lived in or else it begins to die. Mom was this house's most consistent inhabitant. Message is, when she dies, his home will too. I'm home. She begins to wander around the cold house, seeing where the doors have frozen shut and the rooms have been left alone. She finds the room where she left Jihan's books and remembers her promise to herself to learn how to read. This was mostly so she would be able to write a farewell letter before she passes. Other memories begin to crop up as she goes from room to room. She remembers wandering around Seoul, her head fuzzy, but knowing she missed home. What happened to her to be able to go from that state, fuzzy head, not knowing, to this, we will never know. She remembers sitting down in the dirt and drawing her home like a child. She finds her wardrobe frozen solid and knows that it's nearly empty. In a fit of rage during the time she'd get headaches, she threw out a lot of stuff. She wanted to get rid of everything before she'd lose her memory of them. Like breaking the jar lids, she expresses her anger at her headaches and her age by burning clothes she didn't need, breaking objects she never used. She only left blankets and pillows useful for her family. One of the things left in the wardrobe was a mink coat. When she turned 55, she felt inadequate and unpleasant. Sort of, again, like her life has lost meaning. She began having negative thoughts and has also started to lose her memory. She remembers visiting church one time and kneeling over the feet of the Holy Mother. She wanted to pray for her to remove her depression and to take pity on her. But then I stopped myself, wondering what more could I ask of someone holding her dead son. At Mass, she saw a woman wearing a black mink coat and called her daughter, not Jihan, to buy her a coat. Her daughter took her shopping, and mom noticed her looking at her without saying anything, in an interesting way. After her daughter bought her the coat, mom went to another store and asked how much the coat cost. Learning the price, which we don't learn, she demanded her daughter return it, but she said mom deserved the coat. She didn't get to wear it as much as she wanted, but whenever she felt depressed, she would open the wardrobe and bury her face in the coat. She left the coat for her younger daughter. She hears the gate of the house open and she sees father's sister, whom she calls Aunt, comes in. Aunt calls out if anybody is here, expressing how it feels like someone is here, to which Mom responds with, halfway to being a ghost, Aunt. This is the biggest clue as to what state Mom is in. Aunt begins talking to Sonyo as if she's actually there, telling her to come home, reprimanding her for leaving them. She tells her that the saddest people in the world are those who die outside of their home, and pleads her to come home. Mom expresses surprise to see Aunt crying. She reflects on their complex relationship of Aunt's animosity towards her, but also how Mom would look up to her anyways, using her as an example. She knows how much Father meant to her, but apologizes and says she does not want to be buried in his family's grave. They had plotted their graves together before, and she did not like it. Her grave was downhill from his, and she thought it was disrespectful to her, and she says she'll rest at home instead. More memories begin to pop up, from the shed where Chihan read at, to the garden she planted flowers and ducks roamed, to the dog that she raised. She tries so hard to move away from her past, but her memories take her back to it. Experiencing this with her, we feel her love for her home and sadness for leaving it. Back to speaking to father, she says that he'll need to get Hyong-chol's wife to help the upkeep of the house. She knows that she can revive this house. A house takes on the characteristics of its occupants, and depending on who lives in it, it can become a very good house or a very strange house. Mom wants to ensure the home she lived in survives her. In the past, if someone had asked father where he lived when he was drunk and they were wanting to get him back home, he'd name Hyung-chol's house in a location that he doesn't even live there anymore. It's an indicator that he never really saw her home as his. Another show of that. Mom wishes that he would have, but doesn't express any anger at this, just regret. She says goodbye to the house. In the last part of this section, we see how Mom's state of mind was when she went missing. She could only remember things as if she was only 3 years old. Because of that, she walked without knowing anything about herself. She could only see in her mind the yard that she played in as a girl. She could only remember neighbors arriving to tell her mother her father had died, and telling the young Sonyo, here you are laughing, not even knowing that your father died, you silly child. This is the same memory she told Chihon 2 falls ago. Villagers who came to tell grandmother about the accident looked at Mom, running and playing in the yard, and said, you're laughing even though your father has died, you silly child. She was only 3 years old when this happened. With only that memory, she walked until she couldn't anymore. She finds herself in her childhood home in Chinmo. It's implied from this paragraph that when the pharmacist found Mom, she was mentally 3 years old. When people spotted her, she had no idea where she was. Perhaps it was muscle memory or instinct that made her walk through the neighborhoods where Hyung-chol had lived, similar to father being drunk and saying his home was Hyung-chol's house. She found herself there without knowing why and kept going. It's implied that she walked from Seoul to Cheongguk to Chinmo by herself, only walking, and it took several months. Finally, she arrives at her mother's porch, where her mother waits for her. She looks at her, and Mom remembers a dream she had told her that her grandmother had. A cow with a shiny brown coat was stretching, having just woken, raising its knees. My grandmother said I would be very energetic since I was born just as the cow was using its energy to get up, and said that I would be well taken care of because I would become the source of a lot of joy. Again, she's compared to a cow, but this time it feels kind and complimentary. This was the last time she will ever be mentioned in tandem with a cow. Before, it was used to demean and dehumanize her, implying that there wasn't a working mind behind her eyes, that she was as complex as a cow. But now, this comparison is used to elevate her, almost fighting back against such comparisons. And it was a comparison given to her when she was young, when she was a baby. And in a way, her grandmother was mostly right. She would be energetic and would bring a lot of joy, but she was not well taken care of. Her mom reacts sadly to seeing her blue plastic sandals cutting into her foot, revealing bone. Mom sees the face on her mother the same face she made when she had a stillborn. Her mother takes her in her arms, picks her up. It's almost as if mom shrinks into a child, or her mom picks up an elderly Sonyeon. Whatever it is, she helps remove her sandals, the blue plastic sandals we've kept returning to, and helps soothe her foot. Mom doesn't smile. She doesn't cry. Did mom know that I too needed her my entire life? And the section ends. It's strange seeing the grounded, if fractured, point of view of Chihan, Hyong-chol, and father, and then to the shifting and temporal point of view of mom. I believe when her mother picked her up and removed her shoes, mom was finally able to rest and was able to pass away. Her needing her mom calls back to when they cried together when she was getting married, and then when Kyun had wanted to go to school and she was exiled by aunt. This third time, mom expresses how her mother was important and that mom was there for everyone, yet she still needed guidance and love. We never see if her mother was a good mother or not, save for her empathy for her for those 2 moments that we saw, but we do get a sense of mom's helplessness when she grew older and not being able to handle it. Father never cared. Her children never listened. But when he or they needed anything, mom was there. Maybe if her mother was there, mom would have felt better. But who knows? Park Sun-young, mom, your wife, passes on from her hard life in the home she grew up in, and her family will never see her again. Finally, the last section of the book is the epilogue titled Rosewood, Rosary. We return to the second person POV of Jihan, and the section is half as long as any other section. Because we return to Jihan, I see her as the main protagonist of this book. We began with her and we end with her. Every single section had an important moment with Jihan. In a way, this is to help settle the story. Since we started with her point of view, it's the most comfortable one, and as the story and the characters unravel throughout the sections, each new section bringing with it new insecurities, discomforts, unknowns, returning to Jihan is like returning home, reaching something familiar. We begin with learning it's been 9 months since mom disappeared. Jihan's in Italy, visiting with Yubin, and taking a tour of St. Peter's Square in the Vatican City. She's part of a touring group, but isn't paying much attention. She splits from the group and hides in a bathroom, pulling out a letter her sister wrote to her that she found at her door before she left. She hadn't opened it yet, thinking that reading it would prevent her from leaving, but she opens it now. Her sister's letter tells her of visiting mom when her sister returned from living in the US with a new third child, and mom giving her a young persimmon tree. She had left much of her stuff with mom when she moved away, and when she returned, moving back to Seoul, she went to Cheongup to get her stuff, and she found mom collapsed on the ground. When she roused her, mom waved away her worries and helped her take all of her stuff back to her home, and also gifted her a young persimmon tree. It had very small, weak roots, and mom told her to plant it so that when mom dies, she can pick persimmons and think about her. She comments saying that mom began using "when I die" a lot more to get her children to do what she wanted. She had taken the tree despite not wanting it and planted it in her new yard. Whenever mom would visit, she would tell her to move it further from the house, but her sister would keep putting it off. Her sister went yesterday to get supplies and moved the tree and found the roots had grown long and deep. She then became attached to the tree, thinking of mom. She asked Jihan if she remembered telling her to tell her something about mom, and she says that her answer of not knowing her hasn't changed, but now she also didn't know where her strength came from. She can see herself not being able to sacrifice for her children like mom sacrificed. She used to see mom as the concept of mom, and upon recently dealing with motherhood, she had begun to undo that herself. She asks how mom could have dealt with motherhood if she herself can't deal with it now, and laments about not treating her like a person. How unfair is it that all she did was sacrifice everything for us, and she wasn't understood by anybody? Again, we have mom as a concept of mom, and someone attempting to break that down only after mom disappeared. Her sister shows great regret for not treating mom like a person. It's great to see a non point of view character going through the same deconstruction that the point of view characters go through to show that it's more of a universal feeling that needs to be broken down, a generational change. She tells Chihan she wants to understand her and see her again and wants to learn about her. She pleads with Jihan to not give up on Mom and to find her. She doesn't sign off, and Jihan sees drops of water like she was crying, and she can imagine her children pulling her attention away from writing the letter. Jihan returns to the tour group. Before she left the airport, she had called Father, who was now back at home after coming back and forth. They would talk every day, and the day that she left for Italy, on the phone with Father, he told her that he should have let Mom get surgery for sinus empyema. I think I'm saying that correctly. She reacts with dull surprise, and Father says it's his fault she didn't care for herself. Chihan agrees, and after a long pause, Father says he doesn't dream of Mother anymore. Another mention of dreams, of people in dreams not appearing anymore. Did Mom return home at this point? What does it mean when someone doesn't appear in your dreams? He tells Shihan that she was getting sick as he was having ailments, and his pain superseded her pain. He had surgeries to help his body, but she never even had any medicine. One surgery in the past, an aide was looking after him at the hospital, but Father had locked himself in the bathroom when he woke up one at night and refused to come out until Mom arrived to coax him out. The next day, he said he didn't remember anything about the night prior, and when Shihan had reprimanded him, telling him Mom needs to rest too, he shut down and turned away, not wanting to talk about it. Mom defended him, saying he must have felt scared waking up in a foreign place, and when Shihan tries to argue about it, Mom says she sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night too, afraid and running to hide, also not remembering it. This was mentioned prior, but Shihan had to learn from Mom, not Father, who remained silent about it. Father's incompetence and negligence are touched on heavily in the last two sections, and we don't return to him anymore, but it's important to note that at least he is regretful for what he did. In Italy, Chihan and Yubin share a hotel room. We see an intimate moment where Chihan touches his back, which she knows she hasn't embraced since Mom went missing. Her relationships with her family were also strained, falling into silence or arguments when together. That morning, she tells Yubin that she's going to tour the basilica alone as he's going to a business meeting. She left him in the bed early, thanking him for taking her here. She knows he's being patient, and he's been introducing her as his wife here, and she knows she'd be married to him by now if Mom wasn't missing, remembering her promise to marry him once Mom was found. She also began acting impulsively since losing Mom. She would run through Seoul with missing posters, or barge into the police station demanding they find her, or she would call Hyong-chol and berate him for not looking for her. Once she went to Seoul Station and just sort of bumped into Hyong-chol, who also had the same idea to just walk around Seoul Station. He'd begun to give up, and her anger at him increases whenever she sees him and anybody in the family resigning to being without Mom. Their relationship also begins to break down. Now, Jihan can't stop thinking of Mom. Only after Mom went missing did you realize her stories were piled inside you in endless stacks. Small moments here and there about Mom and her life that Jihan learned about, or knew about, or experienced herself. In the spring, Jihan was in Samcheong-dong seeing the trees blooming, and she was saddened to see spring without Mom. You could imagine a desolate road, and the missing woman plodded down the road, wearing blue plastic sandals. This is the moment I believe that Chi-Han finally accepts that she will never find Mom. I want to briefly touch upon her shoes again. This is the last time that the blue plastic sandals are mentioned, and their presence is not much commented upon in their story. When she was lost, Father said that she was wearing beige shoes. Every person who spotted her said otherwise, but the clothes she wore matched the description. Did Father misremember? Sure, he's somewhat incompetent, but I see no reason for the shoes to deviate so much. Or maybe he is that incompetent, and that he just filled in his memory with a random shoe. I would think that it was possible that she changed her shoes had she carried the blue shoes in her purse just in case, but she didn't have anything on her. It stated prior that Father had held on to her purse, and she just had the clothes on her back. Her shoes, to me, represent the eternal mystery of who Mom was, as even with her section, we will never truly know her, as well as the obfuscation of her life from Father. I had to look up. I wrote that and I don't know how to say the word. Jihan left for Rome with Yubin without telling her family. Maybe she is running away from her problems. She had invited her to go, and he had to attend a seminar and didn't really expect her to go with him. When traveling, Chihan reflects on mom fearing planes, but knowing that her constant questions of the places she traveled meant mom wanted to travel too. Thinking about mom on the plane, she realizes she's the same age mom was when she sent Chihan to live in the city with Hyong-chol. She sees that the woman who did that is now gone, replaced by the concept of motherhood and was mom. She tries to compare herself to mom and comes up short. Throughout the story, there is an emphasis on the cultural significance for familial stability, the older generation, over individual hardship, the newer generation. The sign printer's mother was different from today's women. It didn't matter if mom liked being in the kitchen or not. Family is important, and she was happy if her children were happy. But Shihan's sister is frustrated over needing to cook so much. Kyung-chol's personal promises. Shihan tried to make things easier for mom, but hurting her in the process. Things are changing for their society, and people are feeling pain from the shift. How does one respond to these changes when they are stuck in the past? How could mom deal with it all if she could barely deal with her own pain? Chihan and her sister and her siblings will not have to deal with the sacrifices that mom had to deal with, and in a way that leaves them vulnerable to great upheavals like this. It's a delicate balance. In the tour of the Basilica, Chihan overhears the guide say that the Vatican is the world's smallest country. Chihan remembers mom's words, asking which country was the smallest, and mom distracts by asking Chihan what is the world's smallest country, which confuses her, obviously. And mom asks Chihan to get her Rosewood rosary beads from the world's smallest country. And she only says she wants them because Chihan can go anywhere. She goes and finds a gift shop and finds nuns working the cash register. One of them is Korean, and they speak briefly. She helps her find a rosewood rosary, asking if it's a gift. Jihan only nods, not knowing how to answer. She buys a rosary and begins walking. She's drawn towards a crown, finding the Pieta, the Holy Mother, and her dead son. She's frozen in place looking at the statue. Motherhood on her mind, she would think about mom whenever something was going wrong in her life, mom being something familiar. She kneels in front of the statue, placing the rosary in front of it. It's hard for you to look at the Holy Mother's anguish as she holds her son, who has reached death after enduring pain. She can feel like mom is right behind her. She kneels there until she's the only one in the room, and looking at her face, she sees the sorrow in her face melt into compassion towards her son. It's like she's soothing him. She doesn't know if she subconsciously came to kneel in front of the Holy Mother. She doesn't know if she came here to plead for mom, but she can't. And I don't think I need to lay out how mom tried to do the exact same thing, tried to plead to the Holy Mother, but couldn't. Now, Jihan can't as well. We feel this conflict within her. Once more in the shoes of Chihan, once again back to the beginning. Now we have the added baggage of the rest of the story, so we now know more than Chihan. We know about mom's pain and sacrifices. We know about mom's secrets. We know of mom's death. We know the things father did or didn't do. We know about her effects on Hyong-chol. We know about her daughter's choices and how mom saw them. Returning to Chihan in second person leaves us with the dramatic irony of Chihan and her family hoping for mom and knowing it's hopeless. If you compare ourselves to Chihan like she compared herself to mom, there's a huge divide between us, a departure from the beginning. And yet she, like us, know enough to try to better herself. She leaves. Outside of the basilica, she looks around, no longer kneeling and praying to the Holy Mother. She speaks to the air, perhaps to the world or to the audience, or perhaps just to say the words to let them go. Father and her sister had pushed responsibility onto Jihan. Hyung-chol and the rest of the family have let go. The weight of looking for mom, of taking care of her like she took care of them, of all her memories of mom holds Jihan down. Her pain is strong and her memories are deep, and mom will never be found and will never return to Jihan. When she speaks out loud the words she couldn't say to the Holy Mother, she is releasing the responsibility on herself, letting herself live her own life free from any expectations like mom wanted for her sister and wanted for herself. When Shihan says, please, please look after mom, all of that weight falls away like autumn leaves. And that's the end of the story. Yay! Oh my god. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I really wanted to just talk about this book and the tragedy and the drama it reveals that is just so emotional. Every time I return to this script, I find myself emotional all over again, as if I'm reading it for the first time. The usage of changing point of views was really alluring, and I loved getting to explain why it just hits. I more or less went through the entire book, but in no way does it cover replacing the actual feeling of reading the book. There's so many different details and memories that I didn't talk about because they only serve to paint more of the characters' pasts. Mostly within Hyong-chol and Mom's sections, there were whole pages and paragraphs just mentioning a slice of life moment in the past. This book has so many slices of life moments intertwined with the familial drama it is, and unfortunately, I have to focus on the plot over the details. What is the term? Ignore the trees for the forest? Something like that. There were some themes that I wasn't really able to touch on or analyze because I didn't feel prepared to, or there wasn't enough for me to like think about in terms of like poverty and how men and women, children are treated differently and stuff like that. Dreams. There's a lot of themes heavy within this book that isn't really focused on, but it's just an aspect of, and I do enjoy that it doesn't really come to a conclusion. More than anything is just emotion, feeling emotion in this story. And so those are just aspects that I wasn't able to touch on, but they are there, and I just wanted to quickly like touch on them before I forget. I also wanted to share a smaller project I did within this book. So many locations are mentioned by the characters. I wanted to plot the movements of them and the story, seeing how expansive Mom's disappearance was and how Seoul becomes its own character when you begin to think of it like that. I used the website Story Maps. I found the locations named in the book, and you can also follow along with the family as they deal with Mom's disappearance. Link is in the description. Thank you to Reddit users underscore Hanbox and Sol Ganmegi for helping me with some of these locations. Thank you so much for all of that. Please read this book. It's so good, truly. I'll put links to different places where you can buy this book. Reading books and stories written in different countries and cultures than the one you live in can be so educational and illuminating, and getting different perspectives is very important. There are other books by Kyung-Sook Shin that I want to read, like The Court Dancer, Violets, and I'll Be Right There, and other South Korean stories like The Vegetarian by Han Kang, Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, and If I Had Your Face by Francis Cha. After this, I obviously plan to work on the other two books in this series of books that changed me, The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, and Homegoing by Yagyashi. And along with that, between them, I'll also have videos analyzing different episodes of the Magnus Archives, so keep an eye out for that for both projects. Overall, thank you again for watching. Please like and subscribe, share with your friends, comment if you read this book before or if you were inspired to read it from me. I really enjoy talking about this book with you all. I want to be true to who I am as a reader and as a writer, so making these videos is so fun to be able to share my thoughts and my passion. Before I forget, so in my notebook, I had stickers. This one says, "What the hell am I doing here?" And I put it there because it's a fish, and they talk about fish a lot in this book. What's the spirit that's the spirit ghost because mom died. This is not a sticker. This is designed for the notebook itself. It's designed by Kinsey Hotchkiss at kinseyhotchkiss.designs.com. I'll link that as well. Be kind. Be kind. Be kind to each other. This beetle is a Asian longhorn beetle. I got this like set of stickers of bugs. And so there was two that I've written them down just so I can remember what they are. This is the first sticker I put on, which is just a bunch of books. This beetle is a goldsmith beetle because of money and poverty being a theme within this book that I didn't really touch upon. This flower was pretty. It was nature, so I was like, oh, yeah, let's go with that. Not a hugger. I think this feels very aligned with Chihan herself because she was not like other girls. She's not that, but this felt Chihan aligned. And we have Clan Pearl here because it's a child, and this deals with family stuff and children and stuff like that. That's why I have that sticker on here. But yes, anyways, don't be afraid to be passionate, and I'll see you later.